Japanimation Station.
Hello and welcome to Weekly Yaiba Kimetsu, a special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at Japanimation Station. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here with our most weekly podcast of all, Weekly Yaiba Kimetsu, which we have been doing for a long time now, where we are following the wonderful, highly acclaimed anime adaptation of the hottest anime around, Demon Slayer in the States, Kimetsu no Yaiba in Japan, or that's also a preferred title here. And we are here to discuss the beginning of the end for the anime adaptation of Kimetsu no Yaiba, because the beginning of the anime film trilogy adapting the final arc of the manga has just released in the States. We have both seen it, so we are here to discuss, deep breath, Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, the movie Infinity Castle Part 1, Akaza Returns, the greatest title for a film ever conceived.
It's slightly shorter in Japanese because you don't have two versions of the main title. But it is still, the Japanese title I also think is funny because if you write it out in the kanji, it is still hilariously long for like a title written in kanji. It's great. I think it's an amazing title. I loved having to figure out how do I present the title of this movie in my review. I literally, Sean, could not fit the title in the headline. I wrote two versions of the headline of my written review, trying to break up the title in different ways. It was very difficult, but the movie was great. This movie rocks.
Yes. Oh, it's a fantastic movie. It was very, very fun to go see in the movie theater. My movie theater was mega hyped for it. I saw it on Friday night. Usually I see this kind of stuff on Saturday. It was just easier for me to go to a Friday viewing. And every single viewing on Friday was completely packed, which is not surprising given we'll go into the numbers about how much money this movie is making. There were people cosplaying at the movie theater. There were audible gasps when the Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 trailer played before the movie, which I thought was a little bit much. It's like, I don't know how people were shocked.
Oh, I got the Chainsaw Man trailer, but I didn't get a Jujutsu Kaisen trailer. That makes me sad.
Yes. We had both a Chainsaw Man trailer and a Jujutsu Kaisen. There were not audible gasps for the Chainsaw Man one, but there were people, as soon as they heard Itadori Yuji's voice come on, there's like, and I was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a popular anime. Like, it's good. I don't know if we have to be like, I cannot believe it. The trailer for a thing that trailer had been released like a week and a half before that. But yeah, no, people are way into this movie. It was super fun to watch, and I'm very, very excited to talk about it.
Yeah, me too. I would see this at my local IMAX on Friday night, and same thing as you, Sean. It was completely sold out. That was, anecdotally, I've been going to this theater pretty regularly for about a year now since I moved back to Colorado. That is the busiest I have ever seen that theater. Now, I haven't, again, there might be movies like maybe if I had gone to see Superman at 7 p.m. on a Friday instead of, I think I saw it the afternoon of the Thursday, it would have been busier. Who knows? But like, it was busy. People were dressed up. They absolutely were not even a little bit enforcing the R rating this movie has in the States because there were so many kids in the theater unaccompanied. And that's fine. This movie should not be rated R. That's a stupid fucking rating for this movie. This is PG-12 in Japan, and I think PG-13 would be completely appropriate for this movie. But yeah, there were a group of kids who looked like, maybe middle school kids who were dressed up as the various Hashira, including one girl who had a full wig of the Love Hashira, like with the pink. It was like a really shockingly good wig. And so I was impressed to see everyone's costumes. And yeah, the one annoyance is I was seated next to a group of teenagers who I don't know if they'd ever watched Kimetsu before, because all they were there for is when the action was on, they watched the action. And then as soon as characters started talking, they turned their bodies away from the screen and just talked to each other, even when I tried to shush them. And I didn't punch these kids because they were kids, but I kind of wanted to at a certain point. I don't know why they were there.
Yes, luckily, my theater experience was very good. I did not have any random kids talking around me, which at the end of a workday, I have very little tolerance for.
Yes.
I've got I spend the whole day with 14-year-olds not paying attention and talking when they're not supposed to. I don't know if I could take that at 7 p.m. on Friday also.
Yeah. But anyway, this movie is obviously a huge deal. It's been a huge deal in Japan. It's a huge deal here. We'll talk about the money and all of that stuff, I think, at the end of today's show, because it does portend a lot, I think, for the future of anime, both in Japan and over here, because, even as big as Mugen Train was, I don't know if anyone was expecting this one to hit quite as hard as it did. So, but it's a great movie, and again, this is part one of the Infinity Castle arc. And, I did publish a review on my website that I wrote, and I'll just give, for those who haven't read it, my quick thoughts is, I think it's a great movie. It's obviously kind of goes without saying with ufotable that it's a great, spectacular production that looks amazing in theaters. The sound mix in this movie is wild for a theatrical anime. But I think, as always, the thing that blew me away most in whenever ufotable adapts Demon Slayer is how they find sort of the thematic heart of the story and make whatever they're adapting, whether it's a season or a film, into something that really feels coherent unto itself. And I think with this movie, this is by far the hardest lift, I think, in adaptation so far, to take, part of this. The Infinity Castle arc is giant. It was going to be tough to adapt in any medium you did it in. And in a movie, I think it was the right choice over TV, but part of it is, Part 1 will not have an ending. There are a bunch of different fights. Several of our favorite characters are not prominently featured here. What do you do to make a movie out of it? And I think the 3 stories they chose to focus on in this movie, the Shinobu fight with Upper 2, Zenitsu's fight with Upper 6, and then Giyu, Tomioka, and Tanjiro's fight with Akaza, Upper 3, the thematic threads that they weave that are there in the manga, but I think they really do a good job making it feel like a movie out of those thematic threads, in that all of those are stories about mentors and students, or parents and children, and the way they do all of that makes this movie feel more coherent and impactful on its own terms than it almost has any right to be. And they do it over 2.5 hours. This is one of the longest animated movies ever made. It's a really incredible thing.
Yeah, and I will echo everything you just said. That I think the thing I was most curious about coming into this movie was, how does it feel as a movie, right? How do you take this arc that is very big, it's the biggest thing in the manga, is not, I think, an easy thing to kind of divvy up narratively to create a trilogy of films, though it makes sense to me from a production standpoint why you'd want to do it as a series of films rather than as a TV series, because of just the complexity of doing it. Having the extra time of focusing on just a movie probably makes that much easier. But I was kind of shocked at kind of how effortless it felt. Now, it doesn't, it obviously does not have the same kind of movie-like feel as Mugen Train, which is a very clear, 3-act structure style. This is just a movie-ass movie, the kind of movie you expect to see. The structure of the story in this film is unusual, but it really works because there's such a clear level of thematic consistency across the 3 different storylines that build on each other for this really, kind of epic climax, both in terms of the fight and then also the big flashback at the end for Akaza, that it thematically comes home and draws to such a profound point that is such a great summation of some of these, really essential themes of the series, particularly that theme of what do we leave behind and what do we take on for the next generation. All 3 stories are about that, but are about it in slightly different ways. And so while it does not have I think an easy beginning, middle, and end, and all those kinds of things that you would normally get from a movie, it is still doing that thing that a movie needs to do, which is have that level of thematic coherence that carries it through. And in some ways, it makes the movie even more interesting because it has a very unconventional structure by necessity. It makes kind of like the act of watching it and piecing together what it's doing and what it's engaging with is a little bit more challenging, but is a little bit more rewarding. And like, it's not moving things around. It's not making dramatic changes from what they bring from the manga. It's the order of things that the manga does. It's more like, where do they expand and where do they emphasize to put that extra spin on the ball to give it that level of thematic coherence? And that's something I thought was impressive, is I came into this expecting them to make more dramatic shifts from the manga in order to fit this into a movie package. And they really didn't change much. And I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Definitely. And yeah, like, because I definitely suspected, and once we got the subtitle Akaza Returns kind of confirmed, that one of these movies would definitely anchor itself around the Akaza fight, because that is one of the most notable things that happens in the entire manga. It's one of the highlights of the arc. It's a highlight. Obviously, it's a follow-up on Mugen Train, which is like the definitive moment in the life of the anime version so far. But, like, the way I think this movie is anchored by that, but then how much the Akaza fight feels informed by the Shinobu fight and the Zenitsu fight ahead of it, in ways that I don't think I thought about that in the manga. There's a different kind of focusing effect when you're doing it in a movie and you sit down in a theater and they, ufotable says, this is 2.5 hours, this is the story we're telling. And, of course, they tell it so spectacularly well. It definitely blew me away. It's got such a tremendously powerful final, like, hour. At a certain point, I wasn't sure how much time had passed in different places, because, like, that closing flashback is incredibly long, but it is also incredibly engaging and, like, heart-wrenching. But yeah, it's great. It's, as you say, it's a weird structure for a movie. It's effectively a triptych in that you have 3 stories that, other than the fact that they are all happening in the Infinite Castle and the characters know each other, they don't touch each other. Like, Zenitsu doesn't know what Tanjiro is doing, and Tanjiro doesn't know what, Shinobu is doing, other than what the crow tells them. But, like, again, it works so well. And as a production, I mean, it's it's unreal how good this is and how much of a leap this is. Because I think, when you go back to Mugen Train now, like, that movie is obviously incredible looking, but the surprise is that the show on TV managed to just match that from that point on. That, like, seasons 2, 3, and 4 don't feel like they went back to a TV level. So then Infinity Castle does feel like, I think it makes a big leap ahead of that. You've got the incredible soundtrack. And then I think the biggest pleasure for me of this movie is just, this is where a bunch of the incredible casting they've been doing over the life of this series comes to fruition, because you have people like Hayami Saori and Miyano Mamoru and Ishida Akira who, like, they were cast for this stuff, and we've been waiting for them to get to do it, and now that we're getting to hear them do it, oh my god, it's great.
Yes, and then you get some new characters in, and I do have to say, I almost audibly laughed out loud in the theater when I realized that Nakamura Yuichi plays one of the major new characters related to Akaza's past in the film. Just because I'm like, of course, he's like one of the only, like, really high-profile voice actors of that generation that has not been cast in this series somewhere. And there's almost like a comic effect about, like, and they snuck it in for a character that I only kind of vaguely remembered because he's only existed in the flashback for Akaza. But it's just like, as soon as that voice came on, I'm like, yep, they found it. They found somewhere to put him in these movies. Incredible.
Basically the last possible slot where you could get another major actor into the series. Yes. If my memory serves correctly. There might be a little more flashback material, but I don't know if there's anyone on the level of that character who, like, nope, yep, this was the right person for Nakamura Yuichi to do in this. There's no small parts. This is great. Yes,
but it definitely is it is very funny when you get to the end of the movie. And the movie does do an anime style ending credits when you've run out of time. You're like, we just got to play the credits over the ending of the thing, and the last scene is still playing, which I appreciate that. That's a real rarity in a film. But also when it gets to the part when the cast starts scrolling up, it's huge. Because even though there's only, like, a subset of the characters are heavily featured, like, everybody's in this movie. Everyone gets at least, like, one line, gets a little scene. Even, like, Tengen, the sound Hashira, has the one scene with Rengoku's dad. It's like everybody's in this movie somewhere, at least once. So the cast list for this film is just ridiculous. It's so long. And if you watch anime, like, every name is like a heavy hitter as it comes up on screen. It is a definitely, like, insane cast assembled for this project.
Absolutely. So let's start by just briefly paying homage to the staff behind this movie, the crew, which I don't know if we've ever done a deep dive on this on the show with all of our Demon Slayer episodes, but I did want to mention it because, I was looking through it again. One, the credits for this movie are fun to watch if you can kind of pay attention to them out of the corner of your eye, because the number of names is just insane. Like the number of key animators and animation directors and everything. It's a 2.5 hour giant movie that's playing in IMAX theaters. Like, it's a big crew, obviously. But I think the other thing that's really remarkable and sets Kimetsu apart from virtually any other long-running anime of the 2010s and 20s is how consistent the crew has been. And so I just wanted to go through this because I think it's remarkable. Obviously, our main director is once again Haruo Sotozaki, who has held that role for the entire series from season 1 to now. You also have for this one Kondo Hikaru, who is the CEO of ufotable, credited as chief director. I believe Kondo has basically been playing that role the entire series. There are several credits that we know he has basically done that he gets credited for formally the first time with this movie. And that also includes, he's the sound director, the music director. He's written on the theme song lyrics for both this movie and others. And he often has not taken that credit for himself, but those are given here. So this is the first time there's an extra director credited with Sotozaki in that kind of chief director role. And Kondo Hikaru also did storyboards on this. But yeah, he's the CEO of ufotable and a former producer at Telecom, which is a great animation studio we've discussed a lot, particularly in Lupin the Third stuff. So you've got him and Sotozaki. On storyboards, you've got Haruo Sotozaki, Hikaru Kondo, Takahiro Miura, and Takashi Suhara, so 4 storyboard artists. I was surprised, actually, at the end that there weren't more, given how long and complex this movie is. But those are our 4. We have 10 unit directors in full. I'm not going to read out all those names, but they are basically, if you've ever paid attention to who directs episodes of Kimetsu on TV, it's people who've done that. So it's that team. But yes, 10 units. I'd love to know, and I'm sure there will be an art book or something at some point that will specify this, how the movie was divvied up. What are the 10 sections that people were in charge of? And it might not be as linear as that, but definitely that's a lot of people. And then in terms of that consistency, again, you've got Matsushima Akira, who is the character designer and chief animation director. They have done that for the entire series. Nishiwaki Kazuki is the 3D director, has done that for the entire series. Eto Koji is the art director, has done that for almost the entire series, other than season 1, where they were the art director for the first 2 episodes, and then Yanaka Masaru covered the rest of that season. But other than that, it's been Eto Koji. Art director of photography, which I think is a important role in Kimetsu, especially given how much complicated stuff there is Tarao Yuichi, who has held that role again for the entire series. Our music is once again Shina Go and Kajiura Yuki. They've done that for the entire series. And that really speaks to why I think Kimetsu is as big, as great, as consistent as it is that, when you compare it to the other big shonen anime of the era, like an Attack on Titan, which switched studios, or a Jujutsu Kaisen, which switched directors, or anything else, there usually just is more turnover between seasons, from a season into a movie, whatever you have. This is more old school in how ufotable has kept, obviously ufotable does a certain amount of outsourcing, but how much they've kept in-house. Their people have been in these roles for this series from the beginning, and just kind of unwavering on that. And I do think it just speaks to how tight a production this has been.
Yeah, and it's, obviously we've done the ufotable stuff with Japanimation Station with their Fate adaptations and their Type Moon adaptations generally. And it's just, it's so much in the DNA of the studio of how defined their aesthetic is, how well organized their studio is in terms of production and unifying 2D and 3D animation and all these kinds of things, that gives it that Kyoto Animation kind of stamp, right? That it is such a kind of auteur-like studio where the whole studio almost acts like an auteur, where the whole studio has a style and a vision and a consistency, that all these different people, who've worked at this place for many of them 20 years at this point, because a lot of these are the same names that you will also find on things like the Garden of Sinners movies,
Right.
That there's just this sort of legacy that the studio holds up that has moved on to Kimetsu no Yaiba. And so, yes, it is just really nice to see this series have that level of consistency and improvement, right? Where it's all has that basis of the style and the aesthetic that they established from season 1, and they've only kind of grown and evolved from there, right? And you saw that evolution in the second half of season 1, and obviously most notably episode 19 of season 1, where it makes that kind of big aesthetic statement. And then it takes that as this kind of growing point and just continued to evolve from Mugen Train. As you mentioned, seasons 3 and 4, even though they were not films, do not feel like a step back from what Mugen Train did, and instead a step forward. And then this is yet another step forward, and one that they've obviously been kind of like preparing for a long time, because you can feel, and you can see in the lead up to this throughout the whole series of them kind of figuring out how the fuck are we eventually going to do this, because obviously they started adapting the series when basically the manga was finished, and so they knew eventually there's going to be this crazy arc at the end that is set in this just absolutely bonkers setting that we need to figure out how to handle, and has these fights that are just incredible at a different scale than anything we've seen before. And it's only going to get crazier from here, right? I mean, my memory is that the most insane fight is the upper one demon fight.
Yes.
That involves a larger number of people, and the abilities of the upper one demon are just fucking crazy. And so there's still areas to go up from here. But just that level of the improvements in the evolution of the production from this similar aesthetic starting point is really cool to see, and is something very rare to see in this industry, where you have so much turnover, where you have studios switch, directors switch, all that kind of stuff. And that is not something that Demon Slayer has ever suffered from.
Like, you know, maybe this is on my mind because the Chainsaw Man movie trailer played before the movie, but like, Mappa really wants to be ufotable. Mappa really wants to have their own Kimetsu. The problem is Mappa doesn't like keep its staff consistent like this, and they stretch themselves too thin trying to do like 5 Kimetsus at once, where ufotable does 1. Now, ufotable also hit it so big with Kimetsu that they don't need to do like 7 different things at once. I get that, but like, you know, that is a thing that obviously has been holding Mappa back in certain ways, as much talent as there is going on through those productions. And, you know, Kimetsu, it is not a mystery why the series is as good as it is if you have, like, we have followed ufotable, and, you know, like that, we did our Fate ufotable season after, you know, the first couple seasons of Kimetsu had aired. But I just remember, Sean, that being a very, like, illuminating project for us, realizing that, right, Kimetsu didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of, you know, 2 decades of work that ufotable had done, becoming the studio that could do this.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
In addition to all of that, do want to shout out the theme songs. We've got Aimee and Lisa. Aimee did the opening song, which is A World Where the Sun Never Rises. She obviously did, I mean, she's done a ton of stuff, but in Kimetsu specifically, she did the Season 2 Entertainment District Arc theme song. And then we have Lisa, who is sort of the voice of Kimetsu, did the Season 1 theme song, the song for Mugen Train, and the songs for the Mugen Train TV version. And she does the ending theme here, which is our proper 6-minute ufotable movie ending song, which is called Shine in the Cruel Night. I have listened to it like 7 times since I saw the movie. Both of these songs rock. Aimee's song is much more coming out of the score, like the music for that song is basically just an extension of the score in that scene, but it's very good. And then Lisa's song is your proper, like, it goes through 3 different movements, it has a lot going on, it is about the themes of the movie, and it's fantastic. And I do love how they're doing this, because it strongly implies to me that the next movie will have songs by Man with a Mission and Hyde to follow the Season 3, Season 4 thing, and I do want to hear Man with a Mission do a song for that upper one fight, because oh boy.
Yes. I do love it. It's fun with the Aimee song in particular, because, as you say, it is like so embedded with the score. It's got a real Kazuhiro Yuki quality to it.
Yes.
That combined with Aimee makes it feel like it's like a Heaven's Feel song that got lost somewhere.
Yes.
You know, because Aimee obviously did all the songs for the Heaven's Feel movies with music by Kazuhiro Yuki, and so there's something about that combo that I'm like, yes, this is like, it's a very comfy feeling that it just has a slightly different energy than the other Kimetsu themes have had, because it's so embedded in the score, and it's got this very kind of ominous vibe to it, compared to most Kimetsu themes are very like energizing and powerful, big shonen kind of ballads. And this one is a little bit darker to fit over the tone of the opening of this movie, but it makes it very cool.
Yes. So anything else to say before we dive into the film itself and get into talking about all the characters and whatnot?
One thing that, as a totally irrelevant point, but I know it's something that we have joked about with Mugen Train. I just want to reiterate that it is hilarious to me that they called that movie Mugen Train, but then they're like, well, we got to call this one Infinity Castle. Because to be clear, the infinity in Infinity Castle is the word Mugen. And we've made fun of Mugen Train for why the fuck did you leave the Japanese word in there for what is just a very easy word to translate. I feel like they should have just, to really fuck with people, called this movie, Kimetsu no Yaiba, the movie, Infinity Joe. And just not translate the word castle and just say, fuck it, here's how we handle it, bitch, take it.
That would have been especially great because I don't know if you've been following any of the coverage in mainstream media of this movie, Sean, which is fucking hilarious because it's a bunch of people who know nothing about anime suddenly being like, an anime movie is #1 breaking records. We have to figure out how to cover it. So I've seen some hilarious, there was Deadline was trying to explain I have never seen this series, but from what I understand, this is basically the Empire Strikes Back of this franchise. And I was laughing. And I think if they had called it Infinity Joe, you definitely would have gotten a daytime news show reporting it as, and this is the movie where we meet the character Infinity Joe in Kimetsu no Yaiba. It would have been great. And before we get any comments, yes, we know there was a show on TV at some point called Infinity Train, and that may or may not have something to do with why they called Mugen Train. I don't really care. I don't think that show was big enough to actually be a factor in that decision, so you can stop commenting that. But yes, it is funny, and I totally endorse your idea, Sean. This should have been called Infinity Joe.
Yes, I hope that they can fix it because they've got 2 more movies, so they can turn it around for the next one and call the next one Demon Slayer Kimetsu Yaiba, the movie Infinity Joe, Part 2. Here we go again.
I do think it's funny because the Japanese title is up front that this is a Part 1. It's Infinity Castle, Part 1, Akaza Returns. Yeah. In English, they did just call this one Infinity Castle with no Part 1 or anything, which is very much following, Dead Reckoning, the Mission Impossible movie, went out on that limb and tried to do the Part 1 thing and got slapped very hard for it. And we are never, ever, ever, ever going to get another Part 1 or anything like that in American cinema ever again. I think people have, been bitten by that too many times. My guess is that the next one in America will just be called whatever the subtitle for Part 2 is. Right? That's probably what they'll call it, and they won't call it Infinity Castle. But this is another data point in, I guess Americans just don't like it when you're upfront that a movie is a Part 1. They want to be lied to, and if you lie to them, you will get more money. The Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning made more money than it would have if it was called Dead Reckoning Part 2. Americans are just weird about titles.
Yes. And so am I, because it will always bug me that this is called Infinity Castle, but Mugen Train was called Mugen Train.
I agree. All right, so Sean, with this film, I do want to highlight, before we get into it, there's obviously 3 stories to talk about here, but I like the way this movie begins. It begins with a very conscious homage to Mugen Train, the other original movie, because it starts with the mountain and then the graveyard, and because the master is bedridden at this point. In Mugen Train, it was the master walking through the graveyard. This time it is the Stone Hashira, and it's flashing back to the moment when the Stone Hashira learned from the master about the master's whole plan to capture Muzan Kibutsuji. And then we basically, I was kind of expecting they would redo the scene from the end of season 4. They actually don't. They just jump right into where we left off in season 4, where Tanjiro and everybody are falling through the Infinity Castle, and we get our big credit sequence in AMA. And basically, I did think this was a little funny. We get a little bit with every single major character is in there somewhere. And then the ones we don't see again for the next 2.5 hours are basically where we left them at the end of the movie. And I thought that was kind of funny. We just see, what has the Snake Hashira been doing? He's just been fucking everyone up waiting for an upper rank to come get him. And I did enjoy that. Inosuke is just running around trying to find demons. It's very funny. But yeah, we have that scene. Obviously, it's incredible just watching every time we go back to the Infinity Castle in this show, they just layer on the insanity of this realm, of how much movement is going on in it, how crazy the 3D camera is in its motion. how much swerving around the two-dimensional characters we're doing. I mean, again, if you know me, you know I wrote a whole section of my dissertation basically creating a new theory of modern animation based on what Kimetsu does, particularly with this space. So I was in heaven watching all of that. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just worth kind of talking about how that works in the movie, because it is, like, just really incredible. Now, obviously, we have seen them kind of evolve this bit by bit because we have visited this location many times over the course of the series at this point. But I think it's very clear that scene that they kind of invented for the beginning of the Hashira training arc, where the Snake Hashira, the Sound Hashira, like stumble upon the Infinity Castle, and which is a scene that is not in the manga. That is where they kind of like solidified this is our approach for actually using this as like a full 3-dimensional space. But it is just like absolutely jaw-dropping because it's such a major feature of this film, because you have both that opening scene, but you have all these like interstitial pieces where you've got the 3 kids back at the main Demon Slayer base, and they've got their like maps that they are making of like the infinite number of maps, and the crows flying through this space, giving you like, you both like feel like you kind of get to know the space and also get to see how the space itself is unknowable. Like, it's a really interesting way that they kind of balance this sense of we have to give the audience an anchoring in this area, in the setting, because we have to move between multiple different story arcs within one film, and then they'll obviously have to do that within the subsequent films as well. So you have to give a sense of geometric space, but you also have to show how that sense of geometric space is kind of impossible to actually comprehend. And I just think it's like an interesting balancing act they play. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, you get the upper 4 demon playing her biwa, and like the whole thing fucking just going insane and shifting and evolving again and moving everything around. But it is just like such a spectacular piece of every part of the production coming together to make this work. Obviously, in terms of the animation and the 2D and 3D animation stuff coming together, but also just the editing, direction, storyboarding, and the conceptual approach of how to represent this space that you are spending outside of the flashbacks, the entire movie taking place in this one location. It's a real feat of production, what they pull off here.
There is absolutely an essay to be written, and I might have to write it at some point, drawing a line from Kurosawa, Seven Samurai, and the main samurai in that film having his map, the Takashi Shimura samurai, and going around the village and mapping the little village that they're going to, fight the bandits in, onto Kimetsu no Yaiba, Mugen Train, Mugen Castle, Infinity Joe, where you have the children of the master at the mansion mapping the Infinity Castle through the birds, through the crows. I love that idea so much. That is an idea that is in the manga, but obviously in the movie, ufotable goes much crazier with it in how they do all the 3D imaging of like the crows moving through the space, the way they do like the sonar stuff with like where are the upper ranks are these giant red like almost like suns that are like in the environment that we see that people are being drawn towards, and then just all of the paper that everyone is doing to try to map this unmappable thing. I love that idea so much, and I agree with you, Sean, like the way this film expands that space is amazing. Because another thing, if you have not read the Kimetsu manga, a pretty big difference between the manga and anime is that Gotouge tends to like introduce a space, but then in the main action not really show the backgrounds. Like there's just the backgrounds in the manga are much less detailed than anything in the anime, and often they're in much more kind of like nebulous spaces. Like particularly I remember the Akaza fight being in a fairly nondescript area in the manga, and like the focus is much more on what's going on with the characters than anything in the space. And ufotable has always expanded on that stuff, but particularly in this movie, because the only space that is like really clearly the same as in the manga is the fight Shinobu has. Like that space, in part because what happens in that fight is so tied to what happens in that room, that space is very similar between the manga and the anime is basically just, a color full 3D version of that. But for both the Zenitsu fight and especially the Akaza fight, they just do quite a bit more in like fleshing out the spaces everybody is fighting in. And I would have to go back and check the manga exactly, but I believe the Akaza fight is fleshed out a bit in just how much like happens with him throwing Tanjiro and Giyu around the space and some of that stuff. And so this is where like ufotable just knows like, look, a manga is a 2D thing in still panels. We are a studio famed for our 3D camera and everything. They are just going to like go in a slightly different direction, and it's where they really cut loose. But also this movie is like really smart in its use of sort of anime language, in that basically anything in the castle itself, the camera is moving in some way or another. And basically anything in a flashback, the camera is still, and it is much more sort of traditional 20th century anime imaging where it's based on kind of a still camera and layering of the image. And I think it's one of the reasons why, this movie obviously has a lot of switches between flashbacks, internal stuff, and what's happening externally in the castle. But there's a discipline in how they kind of dole out the language of the like form itself that I think helps make that feel like consistent and visceral.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you do have you get it just at the beginning of the movie, and you revisit this a couple of times where you have like some of those just like incredibly wide frames that they use where the characters will be at like the like absolute edge of the frame, like Gyome in the cemetery at the beginning of the movie, and he's at like, I think he's like at the far right edge of the frame, and then it cuts to something else, and then it goes back to that space. He's at the far left. You do it with Tanjiro when he is having like one of his flashbacks at the midpoint of the movie. But yeah, you have those kind of like big wide still shots that make use of the space in that way. And then, as you say, in the Infinity Castle, it is an incredibly dynamic camera that is making use of that more kind of distinctively ufotable blend of 3D, 2D. And yeah, it is a good way of creating that sense of the differentiation between these two elements that are the defining elements of the movie, because all three stories are about the intersection between these long flashbacks and then the present day circumstances, and that all characters involved in the main action, or all the main pairs, have some kind of flashback and obviously have their main action where they are coming into conflict. And so having those two different styles reflect those two different states that the movie is shifting between is very effective.
Yeah. The main complaint I've heard about this movie from people who complained about it was that it's too much flashbacks and too many interruptions of the action. I don't feel that way. I can see how someone could. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think ufotable doles that out really well. I think what we're talking about is part of why I think like they're very good at signifying those switches and making them feel consistent. And I also just think all of the drama is just so rich that I'm very into it. And I think there's a lot of like interesting stuff they do with it. But that is like the what if from people who are less hot on the movie, that's the complaint I've heard.
Yeah, I think it's an understandable complaint, where I think if you're someone who's not really invested in the narrative, like if the reason you're here is to see big shonen anime fights, and that's like your number one thing, I want to see that, then I think you're going to be put off by the flashbacks. But I don't think that's this movie. I think that's true of all of Kimetsu no Yaiba. And that's kind of like, I think the distinction I see is like people who are really into the series and really love the story and characters. Like, this is how every arc in Kimetsu no Yaiba works, is it's about the intersection of these flashbacks with the present day, and not just for the demons, because it's also Tanjiro is constantly having flashbacks, when he's remembering, oh, this is what the Hinokami Kagura dance comes from, and his relationship with his father, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you even have, like, and we'll get a lot more of it next movie, but you have like ancestral memory style flashbacks that start occurring that go to an even deeper level. And so it's just like, it's a series that is very much built upon having this kind of present action and then showing how history sort of leads up to this moment. Because again, one of the fundamental thematic concerns of Kimetsu no Yaiba is about how do we pass things forward, because it's about the conflict between mortals and immortals, and immortals do not pass things forward, they stagnate. And mortals, people who embrace their mortality, it's about how do you leave things beyond you. There's the whole spiritual Buddhist component of the cycle of reincarnation that the series is very invested in. Like, it's a fundamental pillar of what Kimetsu no Yaiba is. So if you're not into Kimetsu no Yaiba and you don't like that storytelling style, you don't really like that part of the series, then you're going to be put off by this movie, because the movie invests more heavily into that style than I think any other piece of the animated version has done, because it's kind of for me, how the movie works as a movie. Like, if the movie did not do that, like, super elaborate, they, like, even expand on it. They make it more elaborate, the Akaza flashback. They put more into it. Like, that, to me, is what is actually the thing that brings the whole movie together. Because it's the thing that I think most clearly shows the thematic relationship and the thematic point of the three stories and them all coming to this final conclusion. But if you're someone who wants to engage with the movie on a more casual level and just wants to see the fights, obviously that really kills the pacing of the fights. I mean, the fight is over at that point, but you might be thinking, oh, but Akaza's not dead yet. I need to see what next level of super move happens that actually finishes him off. If that's the thing that you want to see, you're not going to get it from this movie, but I would also argue that you've never really been getting that from Kimetsu Yaiba in the first place. And so it's like, kind of pick your poison of if you've been along for the ride this far, you know what you want out of the series. And the series is not interested in just delivering the big fights. The big fights are always about arriving at this point of empathy and understanding and a revelation that moves the characters to the next piece of the story. It's not just about the dynamics of how do we beat the bad guy. Like, that's not really what Kimetsu Yaiba has ever been about with the way that it designs its battle scenes.
I totally agree with that. And like, if you just, look at the history of it, the craziest piece of animation in season 1 of Kimetsu is in episode 19, where we first get the Hinokami Kagura. That is a 26 episode season. That season ends with the training arc. Entertainment District arc, the craziest animation, the big, where everything explodes, is in the penultimate episode. The final episode is a big flashback about the demons. Swordsmith Village, same thing. Like, this is how they've all done it. And really, Mugen Train is the outlier in that it has more of a traditional third act climax where there's a big action and then a denouement. But like, it's not out of character for Kimetsu that the biggest moments of action and animation in this film happen about 40 minutes before it ends. And then the rest, then the real climax of the movie is the internal drama going on in Akaza's mind. And like, I do think that is the boldest and most interesting thing about this film, about, part 1, Akaza Returns, is that as crazy as the animation is and as cool as it is to see this on an IMAX screen with all of that amazing sound and everything, I'm not sure at heart this is an action movie. Like, as weird as that sounds, because it is so much more about the internal stuff going on inside the characters' minds and hearts. The Zenitsu fight literally is over in the blink of an eye once Zenitsu does his thing. That fight is much more about whether Zenitsu is willing to, like, go that length to finish this thing off and sever this bond. The Shinobu fight is much more about what's going on in Shinobu's mind as she fights a battle she knows she is going to lose, at least in this moment. There's more to come with that story. And of course, then the Akaza fight, like, there is much more like action and battle stuff, but really what it is can Tanjiro put together all these lessons he's learned from various mentors and father figures, including his literal father, and then what can Akaza learn from what his disgust with Tanjiro, and what does that actually say about him? And that's the thing that's kind of amazing. This movie really asks you to go through all this bombast, but ultimately, at the end of the day, be invested in a 30-minute flashback about one of the most despicable villains we've met so far. And I just think that's cool as fuck, to do that in your giant 2.5-hour movie that is set to break every box office record,
Yeah, and I think it's that element of Kimetsu Yaiba that makes it so popular in many ways. That it's a thing that makes it popular with a really broad swath of people.
Yes.
Because I think if it was just the big action stuff, I think it would still be very beloved within a niche because of like the exceptional way in which the action is depicted, particularly by Ufotable's animation. But I think it's that narrative underpinning. It's like the simple clarity of Tanjiro in his journey and like the empathy he demonstrates. And I think the thing we've always come back to with Kimetsu Yaiba is the ways in which it takes these kind of assumed default elements of the genre of the Shonen Jump action series and treats it with like fresh eyes and a clarity and in kind of an incisive look at those kind of fundamental genre tropes around friendship and goodness and compassion, all that, this kind of stuff. But it's taking it very seriously. And I think that's just the stuff that makes it resonate on a deeper level with a very big audience. And where that stuff features is in things like the giant Akaza flashback at the end of the movie, because it's ultimately about coming to understand that this guy, yes, he needs to be, he needs to move on. He needs to die. Like, it's like, it has to happen. There's no, like, redeeming him in the sense that he can kind of come back from this and be a good guy. He's gone too far. He's removed from the cycle of reincarnation. There's a spiritual death he's already incurred. There's a material death that now must follow. But there has to be an empathy and understanding that he was a person, that he had a real life, and that what has happened to him is not entirely his choice. That what has happened to him has been forced on him by Muzan, and that is a crime that Muzan must pay for, as it has been for all of the demons, right? And I think with Akaza, it's particularly potent because this is the guy who killed Rengoku. This is the guy who, took like one of the most popular characters in the series, even if he was only featured in one movie or one arc in the manga, right? Everybody loves Rengoku. The stamp he makes on Tanjiro and just the fan base is so huge that coming to that point of empathy and understanding with Akaza at the end of this movie is really profound because of this specific demon and what he's done in our relationship to him. I think it's why you need to see the full scope of what his life was, how he came to the kind of conclusion that he came to about his very twisted philosophy about life, and then also see him be able to lift himself up, return to who he is, and move on. And I think like all that stuff is very powerful, and it's like the flashback is what makes that work. And if it was just we beat him because we cut his head off or whatever, or we did, a Kimetsu Yaiba spirit bomb or whatever and killed him at the end, that just is not what this narrative needs. And it would just make the movie feel aimless, because I don't think you would be able to have this kind of unified thematic point that you land on that ties the threads of the other two stories together. It would just feel like a series of 3 disconnected fights that just happen to be happening in this 2.5 hour movie.
Yes, the thematic connections do not happen in the space of the Infinity Castle in terms of what we see on screen. Yes. The thematic connections happen in the flashbacks, or some of it is just like internal, especially with Shinobu, it's more like internal dream states, almost like we see the workings of her mind. But absolutely, I agree with all of that. And yeah, it's what makes Kimetsu Kimetsu. If you go back to our first ever podcast talking about season 1, now known as the Tanjiro Kamado Unwavering Resolve arc, because I just think that's a great title. I said there that like I enjoyed Kimetsu from the very beginning, but the moment I like sat up and really thought, oh, this is potentially a great show, is at the end of that like first little arc where Tanjiro has to do like the test on the mountain, and he defeats the big demon that no one else has been able to defeat, and then he reaches out and touches it, and we get the backstory. I'm like, oh, that's what this show is. And all the way to now, yes, that is what this show is, more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing we've been saying all along is obviously like, is the Japanese title of the series, Kimetsu no Yaiba, the blade of demon destruction, or however you want to translate it, it's a great title because it's open to interpretation what that blade is. And as we talked about then, it's like one clear lens to understand the series is that blade is Tanjiro's empathy, and it's his kindness and compassion, that is the thing that separates him, that gives him the level of effectiveness he has. But there's also the clarity of purpose of understanding that the demons must be destroyed, but you don't have to cut yourself off from empathy in order to do that. In many ways, the empathy is the thing that allows him to do it as effectively as he does.
Indeed, it allows him to be the little cog in the big machine. I love that visualization. Yeah. We have it's the one scene Nezuko appears in. Obviously, she's in kind of a comatose state in this movie, so we don't get any like dialogue, but we do get the what is his name, Urokodaki, I think.
Yeah, Urokodaki-san.
Yeah, he's awesome, and he has the big speech that was in all the trailers about like the final battle. This idea has been resonating in my mind. I love that whole speech he has, and then that visual they do of the 3D like cogs turning and everything. It's a great like kind of get hype moment in the middle of the movie. Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yes. Yeah, it's exactly that he is the last piece that has to fall into place. That extra level of clarity he gives everything that allows the whole mechanism of the Demon Slayer core to finally come to the point that it needs to come to try to kill Muzan.
Yes. All right, so let's talk about the 3 major battles we have in this movie. We start with sort of the battle that seems to be lost and the one that is effectively unfinished at the end of this movie, and that is Shinobu versus Upper 2, Doma, voiced by Miyano Mamoru, in, I think, the creepiest performance he's ever given. Mm-hmm. What's creepy about it is it's not anything like any of his other villain voices. It's so much more like his friendly voice, because I think Doma genuinely believes he likes the people he's killing and that he's doing them a service. And there's something, I'd kind of forgotten how twisted that character is. And the, like, obviously this section is more about Shinobu than Doma, but I do just want to highlight Doma. Like, Doma creeped me the fuck out in this movie in a way I was not prepared for, and it is because of how, like, his pathology is so unique, and I loved getting a highlight on it here and having our beloved Miyano Mamoru, who we've talked about a million times, getting to shine here, because God, he's great.
Yeah, because we obviously have had like little pieces with this character when we've had like one flashback where he showed up, where you saw him, and I think that's the first time we had the voice. And then you have like the bigger scene where you have all the upper demons together at the beginning of the Swordsmith Village arc. And you get some more with him. That's very fun. But yeah, it's always just felt like such a great piece of casting and such a great performance. And now we finally get to see it in its like more proper context. That's not just like a little extra scene on the side, but it's him confronting, one of my favorite characters of the series, Shinobu, it makes this section very brutal. But yes, he is like really chilling because there is that sort of just emptiness to him, where he's so it's almost like a little bit of that kind of like the trick of Frieza in Dragon Ball, with like the way that the character's written and performed, of the politeness, and how Frieza speaks in Keigo and all that kind of stuff. But it's like that, like dialed up to like the nth degree, that it's so unsettling. How much, as you say, I think you kind of believe that he really thinks that what he's doing is for the benefit of these people. And you get in that flashback, this is a character who has kind of, as far as we've seen, always looked at the world this way, always believed this thing of him being above other people, him being better than other people, and him knowing what is best for them. And him ultimately coming to the conclusion that what is best for them is death, because that is what prevents them from suffering, and they live on within him spiritually as a demon, as this kind of perversion of the cycle of reincarnation, that they are part of him, instead of going back into, the proper cycle that they should be part of. They reach the dead end that is Doma, but Doma thinks that that's the best place for them to be because of how incredible he is. There's just something so unsettling about like the sheer like calm confidence that the performance projects in that character's kind of ideology. It's really fucked up.
100%. And the Frieza comparison is a really good one, Sean. I've just finished rewatching the Frieza arc in Dragon Ball, actually, and like the thing about Frieza, of course, is that it's a put-on. The Keigo and all that stuff is a mask he wears, because Frieza is like a very petty, insecure person underneath it. And as soon as he gets pushed a little bit by Goku, that all goes away, right? And he's just an angry little asshole. It's not a put-on with Doma. Like, that's the creepy thing. It's so earnest. It's earnest all the way to the very end. And Miyano Mamoru is one of our favorites. He's also Setsuna in Gundam 00 and Light in Death Note and all these things. And I remember when we first hear him, it's in the Swordsmith Village arc, and we get that scene with him at the beginning where he's arguing with Akaza. Well, Akaza is arguing with him. Doma thinks he's Akaza's buddy. And I was like, oh God, I cannot wait to get more of this. And we had to wait a little while, but it was worth it. And then you've got Shinobu, obviously voiced by Hayami Saori, who is probably most famous these days as Yor in Spy Family, but we've also talked about her as Shoko in A Silent Voice, and she's Yamato in One Piece and lots of other things. And this was one where just like Shinobu hasn't been in the series much yet. And this was very much here is why they cast Hayami Saori, because Shinobu has to go through like 7 character transformations in about 30 minutes, and you have to have the best of the absolute best doing that. And this is as good as anything Hayami Saori has ever done. This, as you say, heartbreaking to watch this section play out, but also amazing to finally get to hear this performed and animated and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it is. I've just really loved this character since she was introduced, because I think that all that stuff in the Spider Forest section, and she comes in and saves Zenitsu and all that stuff. The character just makes such a strong impression, and then she's in the background for a very long time. So yeah, her coming back here to face Doma, a fight that she obviously can't win, at least not in this way, is so brutal. But it is such a powerful sequence, and I just think like it's something that sets up this movie so well. And it's also the thing I think I was most surprised to see this movie do.
I was going to ask you about it, because I was going to say that I kind of expected that they would combine all the Doma stuff, and like they're not spoiling it for people, but where the Doma fight eventually goes, I kind of thought they'd put that all in one movie. and they don't. And I actually think that's the thing that makes this movie work.
Yeah, exactly. Because to be clear, after watching the movie, I skimmed back through the manga to just refresh my memory on how that's sequenced. And the manga sequences this stuff exactly like this. Like, it reaches the point where Shinobu is absorbed by Doma. Kanao comes in and freaks the fuck out. And then it cuts to some of the Zenitsu stuff, just like the movie does. But yeah, I just had assumed that they would have all the Doma stuff be together in one movie. But I think it actually works incredibly well as this kind of almost kind of prologue to this film, that you get kind of one iteration of the cycle of this movie that it goes through 2 more times, of this confrontation between a demon and a demon slayer that have like a deep-seated connection, like rooted in a history together. And you get like the respective flashbacks on either side, right? You get Doma's flashback of him being this little piece of shit kid who's put in this position. To be fair to him, he is kind of forced into this position as the leader of this cult when he is a child, though he is a little piece of shit still. But maybe he could have not been such a piece of shit if his parents hadn't made him the leader of a cult just because he was born basically albino. But you get that, and then you obviously get all the Shinobu stuff of her flashing back to losing her sister and how that motivates her. But having that then lead to the conclusion being the Demon Slayer loses the fight, and you get this like really chilling moment where the crows fly through the Infinity Castle and announce that Shinobu has died. And that's like, in many ways, that feels like where the movie actually kicks off, because it ties everything together. All the characters you saw in the opening credits sequence that are all off on their own are all united by this one realization of, oh fuck, we've already lost one Hashira. Like, you're already put on the back foot. And it's like we have to like build ourselves up from here. But it creates that sense of danger and consequence of that, like, that these fights don't feel like they have a predetermined outcome because you start with one with her losing, and that you also don't revisit it. Because I kept on thinking like, oh, are they going to is that what this movie's going to be? Is going to like bookend with, or going to come back to the Doma fight and see it through to its full conclusion? And I think it works way better that you don't, and that is hanging on the movie. And instead, the bookend is not that we revisit the Doma fight, it's that we revisit the crow flying through the castle, but this time announcing the victory of killing Akaza. And kind of that is the way that we feel we've created this full progress in the film, that we start from a loss and we end with a victory represented in the same way. And like, it's just such a elegant way to try to tie together this very kind of beast of a movie that they have to make based on the material they're adapting. And like, it's really impressive to me that the answer to that question, how did you do it, was just, let's do it like the manga, but just be very intentional about where and how we emphasize certain things to create that bookending structure and all those kinds of things. But it is like, I think it was a kind of bold choice to just stick with, let's do that kind of first half of the Doma fight. We'll have, this really powerful, like, both like really incredible fight that's very cool, because the dynamic of it's very different with how the poison works with Shinobu, but also just take it to Shinobu's death and never resolve that point. It's just kind of hanging for the whole movie that Kanao is there fighting a fight that she can't possibly win. And as far as we know, Shinobu is dead, who's a kind of fan favorite character. It's like, it's a pretty fucked up way to do a movie, it's kind of like if with the Empire Strikes Back weird comparison you're saying this of the media makes, it would be if like Han Solo got put in the carbonite in the first 30 minutes of Empire Strikes Back and you didn't get him out. Well, you're just like, he's out there somewhere.
Here's the comparison I was going to make, Sean. It's if Return of the Jedi had done what it should have done and killed Han at the beginning.
Right,
like,
yes.
If Return of the Jedi had started the way Harrison Ford and Lawrence Kasdan and everyone other than George Lucas said Return of the Jedi should have started with, kill Han, set the stakes, and then, like, move on from there, like, because it's doing exactly that kind of thing of, as you're saying, it's this kind of prologue sequence that sets this really ominous tone. But the other thing I think thematically that, again, makes this work as a movie, where it begins and ends, is it starts with this sequence that, as you say, is establishing that dynamic of Demon Slayer and Demon who have a previous connection, but it is also about mentors and students, because that fight doesn't just end with Shinobu dying. It ends with Shinobu giving that final little hand signal she does to Kanao, and Kanao rushing in. And that's where we leave it, is Kanao has to watch her mentor and literally older sister, because Kanao has been adopted into this family, die. And it is this recurrence of trauma. And then we leave that hanging. And the rest of the movie is about those kinds of questions, about mentors and students and betrayals and losses and all of those things. And I think because that is left unresolved and it is hanging over the movie, it really keeps things, I think, thematically focused. Because again, the difference is that while the manga is the same sequence, of course, once you get through the Akaza fight in the manga, you can just keep reading. It's the next chapter. But this is a movie that then, credits roll and we cut to black. And Kanao has not resolved that question, but we've seen how it gets resolved through the story of this movie. And I think that is like just such a smart gesture this film makes.
Yeah, and it just makes for just a very propulsive opening that sets up, it teaches you everything you need to know to watch the movie and kind of piece together what the movie is doing, giving you this kind of standalone vignette. And there's something about the way in which, and obviously this is all pulled just from the manga, but how it's set in that kind of very unique room that you're pointing out earlier that is very particular from the manga, but it also looks totally different than anywhere else in the Infinity Castle. There's something about that, of how this whole space is set off on its own at the beginning of the movie in such a unique way, that gives it just a very interesting feeling. It's just a very different vibe that makes it feel like it's got that almost kind of prologue structure to it, that then now we're getting into kind of like the main part of the film by moving on to Zenitsu and then Akaza. But it just has a very elegant way of setting up everything this movie needs to do.
The other thing the Shinobu fight, to me, emphasizes is that structurally this movie knows exactly what it's doing. Because this movie very much takes what I always think of as the Godfather 2 approach to cutting, which is the famous story of Godfather 2 is that obviously Coppola shot effectively two movies, the past with De Niro and the present with Pacino, and how do you combine those? And the ultimate answer Godfather 2 came to of having a very complex structure like that is to simplify the structure and to just have that it does not cut between past and present that much. You can split, Godfather 2 is a giant 3.5-hour movie, and you can split it into about like 6 or 7 chapters, and it is very disciplined about that. And I think you and I both argued before we ever knew they were going to do this as a movie trilogy that Infinity Castle should be a movie trilogy. And I think part of that is because I wanted it to be able to maintain what the manga does and stay with these scenes. And I think if you did Infinity Castle on TV, you would be much more pressed to cut between events. The way like the Swordsmith Village arc cuts a lot between the kind of two halves of the fight going on. And that is kind of the one, that's a great season. That is sometimes the one weakness, is that like the wind Hashira, not the wind, is he the wind? No, the mist Hashira, sorry, Tokito, is in that bubble for a really long time. And we keep cutting from him in that bubble. And like, I think the movie, you can just feel in that once it's, because the movie has a lot of cutting early on, obviously, as it's showing you where all the characters are in the space. But then once we get to Shinobu walking in on Doma, the movie does not cut until she is dead and Kanao has come in. And it just lets that scene and all of its flashbacks and all of its pieces play at full length. It doesn't have to worry about where are we cutting for the commercial break? Where are we divvying this up for episodes? Where are we going to a B story because we can only get through so much A story in a 20-minute episode, blah, blah, blah. And like, to me, I remember just watching it in the IMAX going, this is why you do this as a movie, is because this feels so good just to be locked in on this. And then the Zenitsu thing is also locked in. And there is a little bit of a break between when we meet Akaza and when we fully lock in, because there's some other scenes going on. But again, once we're fully into the Akaza fight, we don't go anywhere else. And that is, I think that is the biggest benefit of doing this as a movie, is getting to just lock in and adapt it at length and not pace it the way it needs to be paced and not worry about anything else.
Yeah, I think that's very true, because if you had your kind of like weekly episode structure, either you have this sense of like fatigue because those episode breaks make it feel like we should be moving into something different, even though we're sticking with the same plot line, or in order to combat that fatigue and kind of leverage the episodic structure, you end up with, as you say, the Muichiro bubble thing of where it feels like this character is sort of stuck in this weird plot for a while off to the side while we're doing other stuff. And yeah, I'm with you. That is the benefit of the movie structure, is you just get to stay with it, like with the manga, because especially once the manga is finished, you're just chewing through that whole thing, just going. And yes, like I think the movie kind of is able to get some of that feeling while also being able to like chunk it up in this very big picture way that allows a certain focus on these themes we've been talking about. But yeah, it is definitely, I mean, you can feel how like this is just completely the right choice. It's hard. I mean, I can imagine how you can do the Mugen Train thing and edit this into a TV show. Like, absolutely, I think you could do that. And I suspect that they likely will do that and turn it into a TV season at some point, because why the fuck not?
Right.
It would be a financially irresponsible decision not to do that at some point, especially in the bridges between the movies. But like with Mugen Train, like I just can't imagine that being the preferable way of watching it. That the movie version is just so ideal for the content that they're pulling from the manga. Just like Mugen Train, being able to just do that whole arc in one go is just the best way to handle what that was dealing with from the manga.
I totally agree. Like, I mean, if you're someone complaining about the flashbacks, imagine the TV version of this where Tanjiro beheads Akaza and then there's like 3 episodes of flashbacks. Like, how would that play? Like, that would be, especially if you're watching it week to week, and you get one episode where Tanjiro beheads Akaza, like, oh, cool, and then Akaza gets back up, it's like, oh shit, wait a week, 20 minutes of flashback, wait a week, 20 minutes, like, it would be a really weird way to structure. I just think for TV that wouldn't work at all. And I think in a movie, movies just have a different kind of attentional valence, and I think it works really, really well here. And I think that Shinobu scene, that, like, it's probably about a half hour, is such a good model of how you can just zero in on this thing and go through. And I just remember being like, oh my God, this is so good. Like, on a dramaturgical level, that scene is fucking fantastic. And of course, the fact that it is basically a duet between Hayami Saori and Miyano Mamoru certainly helps.
Yeah, and it's just like the production is so good. I love the way that they visualize, particularly Shinobu's abilities, because she fights so differently from the other demon slayers, because she's so small and she has like this weird little needle sword that's all about just these quick stabs to try to inject the poison, and her sheathing the sword and twisting it to inject the new poison and all that kind of stuff. It's just you get a very different kind of fighting than you get in the rest of the movie, where you see, obviously we've seen the way that Zenitsu fights, and all that kind of stuff. We know how Giyu and Tanjiro fight. Obviously they're like at the next level, and we know how Akaza fights, because he fights like how he fought in Mugen Train. And they take all those characters to a different level than how we've seen them before, but there's something very fun about seeing 2 totally fresh feeling characters, because Shinobu's only had like a little bit of action in season 1. That is like a blink and you miss it, because she's fighting demons so much weaker than herself. That seeing her struggle, seeing Doma's ice powers and all that kind of stuff, and his cool fans and all that, it's just one of those things that gives that whole opening this totally different feel than the rest of the movie. I think you just can kind of feel the animators working for Shinobu in particular really stretching their legs and exploring a different physicality for a character than Demon Slayer has done before.
Absolutely. There are a couple moments in this movie that made me audibly gasp with the animation and the staging and everything, and one of them is in this scene, and it is effectively the climax of the fight where Shinobu pins Doma to the ceiling and the ceiling cracks. That's a great like panel and page in the manga. The way they visualize that here with like the camera and the way they deal with, that we're moving that sharp move upwards, and then the sound that just like echoes through the theater. There's something about that moment where like the full impact happens that I just like gasped and moved back to my seat. Like that was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like the build up to it of her like crouched like right to the bottom of the floor and then launching up. Yeah, it's a really incredible moment.
Then we have the fight between Zenitsu and our upper 6, Kaigaku. So kind of our last minute upper 6. He was just promoted basically to fill in the previous upper 6. And obviously we have Shimonohiro voicing Zenitsu as he always has, although getting his kind of his big hero moment of the series here. And then as Kaigaku, who is a new character for this movie, we have Hosoya Yoshimasa as the voice. You might know him as Rainer Braun in Attack on Titan, and we would know him on this podcast as Orga Itsuka in Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Great actor. And here's the thing, I remember in the manga this being like my least favorite part of Infinity Castle, because I think it felt structurally a little out of the blue. It felt a little vestigial. And I don't know if I would have to read the manga again and like see the movie again and do a more of a pointed comparison. And it might just be that Shimonohiro is that good and Hosoya Yoshimasa is that good and the staging of this fight is that good. But I loved this section. I think everything is on point. Obviously those voices are great. I think in terms of the raw storyboarding, blocking, lighting, this is my favorite part of the movie. They do this really sharp thing where they have Zenitsu lit by red lights and Kaigaku lit by blue lights, I believe, or it might be yellow. But they have them lit in... No, I think Zenitsu is yellow and Kaigaku is red. But they literally have like lights on the floor and they're digital light sources, so they're doing this like dynamic illumination on the scene. And like the way that lighting moves, the way you have the ending of them both falling through the like infinite space of this one hallway, all of that, like it's just executed at such a high level. I was kind of taken aback because this is one of the more vestigial parts of the manga in my memory.
Yeah, no, because it absolutely is. Because, yeah, in the manga, it kind of feels like it's a weird, like, hangover from some other version of this arc that would have done this, where you have all the characters have, like, a one-off, like, fight with a specific character paired to them, rather than it being what it really is, which is a series of team fights of a group of people fighting a single upper demon. And I think some of it is I just kind of think Gotouge was more or less done with Zenitsu at this point and had to find somewhere to pay off this character and didn't want him or couldn't see of how to include him in one of the existing fights or something. And so he gets this weird one little fight. But in the manga, it also just is like kind of a blink and you miss it. I think it's only one chapter or maybe it's 2 chapters. Like it's so fast. And this is probably like the biggest change that the movie makes. Is just how much they expand on it. Like the flashbacks here are way more elaborate than they were in the manga. The fight itself is pretty substantially extended because the fight is basically like 2 or 3 exchanges and then Zenitsu wins, which has a certain appeal because Zenitsu's whole thing is that he's a one-hit kill dude, right? But like cinematically, I don't think it works in the manga because it's just like you're just not invested in that fight because there's other more important shit going on. Right. But I think especially cinematically, it would just have felt so weird if it went as quickly as it did in the manga and it was like a 5-minute scene. But the way in which they really flesh out and double down on this idea of Zenitsu and Kaigaku being polar opposites, right? That Zenitsu is the guy who the only form he was able to master was the level 1 form. And then Kaigaku was able to master every form but that level 1 one. And how he kind of can't live with that. And it's what drives him to be a demon and his kind of like the petty attitude he has. And Zenitsu's great little monologue he has about how Kaigaku has a hole in the box that holds his joy. And if he can't, without ever having found a way to plug it up, all that joy is just pouring out. Is like just like a really beautiful little moment, which I think that line is in the manga as well.
But the visualization of that with the 3D box of gold like pouring out, it's a great little visualization.
Yeah, and it's just so informed by the expanded flashbacks where you I think are able to invest in the idea that these two characters have this pre-existing relationship in a way that the manga doesn't sell nearly as well, because it does feel, it's kind of like a classic serialized fiction problem of where you want to introduce a character, like you realize you need a character deep in the series that has some sort of long-standing relationship with an existing character, even though, well, we've been with this character forever now. How the fuck is this never... It's like the Uncharted 4 problem of all of a sudden Nate Drake has a brother. And eventually you get past it and you're like, it's fine because the story's good. But early on, you're like, really? Like, how have I played 3 games as this guy? Or 4 if you include the fucking Vita one. And somehow it has never come up that this dude has a brother that he dramatically lost in prison and it's like a defining trauma of his whole life. It's a little bit much to kind of accept. And I think it's, in the manga, because it's so quick, you just never have time to build any of the buy-in. And so it just feels like this kind of cheap little one-off thing that kind of just is like, we have to do some closure for Zenitsu, and then let's move on. And the movie, I think it's the amount of time they invest in it, how much they expand on both the fight and the flashbacks, but then it's also its position in the film as being this middle sequence, as this transition that shows like kind of one cycle of this that is a success for the Demon Slayers, that Zenitsu is able to face this guy. You have your dual flashbacks with both of them, and ultimately Zenitsu is able to prevail. That then gets to lead us into the Tanjiro versus Akaza section that gives us this sort of like extra piece of ammunition for us to get like kind of into the main feast of this film. And so I think it's that transitionary element of it, and it doing another cycle of these themes. So you get to see that it is a cycle. You get to see that they're repeating, and that there are kind of multiple ways to look at these relationships of mentors and father figures, and disciples and all this kind of stuff. You see one more iteration of it before you get into the main thing that this movie is interested in, which is the Akaza fight. It just gives it a sense of importance and thematic weight it really does not have in the manga.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I do think, in addition to everything you said, I do think the most important thing is it being in this movie, in this place in this movie. It being the middle of this movie, which means it is reflecting on both halves, before and after it. And it gets to be informed, because I remember it was this section where I started to like really understand what this movie was doing thematically. And it's because you've had the Shinobu fight and the kind of unresolved nature of that. Now you get this, and this really because this is the most highlighted of a mentor-student thing, because it is literally Zenitsu looking at his opposing part and trying to avenge his master. But it has such a clear resonance on what happens before it, and I think it does so much to help us understand what we should be focusing on in what comes after it. Again, and in the manga, they're just... Because the manga is, again, it's a big series of chapters, these chapters are more vestigial, as you were saying, they're shorter, it just kind of comes and goes, but you put it in a movie, you give it that extra meat, it's staged so well, whoever was the unit director on this section, it's so good. Yeah. That is where it really feels like it comes alive, and it gets to be informed by and inform what comes before and after it. Yeah, and again, you can't discount also, Shimanohiro has always been so good he's good in everything. He's one of those actors I just love hearing wherever he pops up. He's got such a distinctive voice. But Zenitsu is his defining performance, because the way he's able to go from the most extreme version of the a side protagonist who is a coward who becomes a hero, the Usopp character type or whatever you want to say. And I know some people get annoyed by it. I think Zenitsu is very funny, particularly how Shimono voices him. But then the way none of that is in this movie. And just the way he gets to just fully embrace this side of a Zenitsu who is pushed so far. There's always been a certain amount of righteousness within Zenitsu and a certain sense of justice, and it's buried by other things. But if you give him something to believe in, he'll fucking believe in it. And you get that here. And I remember, Sean, I think it was when we were talking about the Entertainment District arc in that podcast, we make the point that, after Rengoku does obviously as good a job as he possibly can against Akaza, and he loses. And after that point, the lesson everyone learns is there is no way to beat an upper rank demon alone, and no one ever does for the rest of the series. And I remember we got comments saying, you're forgetting someone. And I'm like, who am I forgetting? And I think it's because the Zenitsu thing in the manga is kind of forgettable. But in the movie, no, to be fair, Kaigaku is upper six, and it's kind of a honorary upper six.
Yeah, it's a technically he's the upper six demon,
But we shouldn't take it away from Zenitsu. Zenitsu is the only person who goes up against an upper rank and beats them alone, and Zenitsu gets to do a super badass thing, and it's very fucking cool.
Yeah, and it's also just very fulfilling and important that the resolution of this fight is the whole that Zenitsu has made a unique technique within the thunder breathing style. He's made the 7th or whatever number it is technique, because obviously that's the resolution is about how we're taking what we have learned from our master and then we're going to the next level. And it's not necessarily important that he learns every one of the pre-existing techniques and all that kind of stuff. What's important is that he takes what he has learned and he builds something new and goes beyond where we were before. And that is something that Kaigaku could have done if that's the way he saw the world. But unfortunately, that's not the way he saw the world. And that is why he has to lose. But it's one of those things that is that very kind of powerful triumph that leads us into now Tanjiro must learn to do the same kind of thing against a dude that is not technically the upper third demon. This is not a I made it in because we just didn't have enough members, we have to have it's a 6-person team and we've only got 5 people. So we grab someone off the street to fill in the spot. It's like, no, this Akaza is the real fucking deal. And Tanjiro has to go to places that we have not seen before. And so it just sets up where we have to be to do this kind of thing really effectively.
Of course, before we get to Akaza, at the end of the Zenitsu fight, we also do get really the only bit of comic relief in this otherwise very serious movie, which is Yushiro, the demon who's the assistant to, what's her name? Tamayo, I think. Yeah, he rescues Zenitsu, and we get to see that. And there's the whole interaction Yushiro has with the other demon slayers, the non-Hashira ones, and it's a very fun little set of scenes as Zenitsu is being healed. And I think that is the right point in the movie to have a little bit of comic relief for us, because otherwise this is a pretty breathless, heavy movie.
Yes, yeah, it's nice to have Murata, the jobber demon slayer there, and he just gets to get your comic relief. But it's also nice to see that I like that they have the regular demon slayers get to kill some demons. Obviously if they're not a big fight or anything, but you just get to see them effectively work as a little squad and take down these big demons that are just regular ass demons. Because it's been such a long time since we were in the world where we're fighting just a normal demon. We haven't seen that since the beginning of season 2 or something, where they added in that scene where Tanjiro takes out a couple of them to show how badass he's become by the end of season 1. That it's nice to see oh yeah, this is just a normal ass demon, and you just get a couple of scrubs. But even if they're scrubs, if they work as a team, they can take this thing down. And there's just something nice about seeing the Demon Slayer Corps be able to work as a unit. You also have the whole concept of us coming out of that Hashira training arc where all of them should be more powerful than they were. And I think they you get a little bit of that feeling, which is nice in the film, that training and all this stuff is worth it, and that all of our characters are cogs in a much, much bigger machine. And maybe some of them are more important cogs than others, have more important responsibilities, but you need all these people here in order for this to work, or our guys would just be fucking swarmed by a million demons and would never be able to even get to these fights.
Exactly, and in the manga, there's more of a focus on this near the end, and I think this is a good setup this movie does that we'll get in presumably the third movie in this trilogy, with the kind of final action involves a lot of this kind of stuff. So, not to spoil anything, but there's more teamwork to come. If you didn't understand that was one of the main themes of Kimetsu, by the end of this movie you hopefully should, because they basically say it explicitly to the camera. And yes, that leads us to the Akaza fight, which, Jesus fuck. Yes, okay, the flashbacks we'll talk about, most important part thematically, but oh my god, everything with Giyu and Tanjiro and just being thrown through all the different levels of the castle and all the places this fight goes to, this is where it feels like, okay, ufotable found yet another gear to move to beyond what we had seen before. I don't even know what to say. There's some of the action in this section is unreal.
Yeah, no, it's fucking nuts. I mean, one, it's just really nice to finally see Giyu get to do his thing, because he's another kind of like Shinobu. We've seen him fight, but we've never seen him fight like an equal opponent. You've got a little bit of stuff in the Hashira training arc where you see the duel, I think, between him and the Sound Hashira, Shinazagawa, but you don't have a proper fight with him yet. And it's this kind of thing where you always get the sense that Giyu is one of the most powerful Hashira, probably just below Gyome. But you just never really get a proper fight with him. And so seeing him go up against Akaza, and him awaken to the mark or whatever, so he's able to kind of go further than any Hashira has ever been able to go against an upper rank demon, is very satisfying, while seeing the slow progress of Tanjiro. I just love the pacing and the structure of the fight, of Tanjiro slowly trying to find ways to work his way into this fight, to kind of work alongside Giyu, and him kind of putting it all together, and his little kind of like verbal sparring matches with Akaza as Gyu, as he like points out in the movie, Gyu does not like to talk. Talking feels awkward to him. He just wants to fight, and Akaza is a fucking chatterbox. It's weirdly like the end of the Batman Beyond Return of the Joker movie, where Joker is like, I'm not used to people talking while I fight, because he's always fighting regular Batman. But yeah, but it's just like a fun dynamic of seeing the slow buildup of this just guy who, you know, because of Mugen Train, is just on a total other fucking level than anything we've seen before other than Muzan. And that, you know, no human being stands any kind of reasonable chance, and them just sort of desperately trying to eke out this fight that they're really, until Tanjiro has his epiphany at the end, like, they're not really making progress in the fight, right? Like, Akaza's ability to regenerate is so profound, as we saw in his fight against Rengoku, that, like, it just kind of doesn't matter. You can't whittle this dude down. You can't wear him out or anything. And so just seeing them throw themselves against this guy over and over and over again, as Tanjiro's desperately trying to figure it out and put this whole thing together of how can we beat this guy? How can I get to this place we have never seen before? It's so well structured. It's so well built out as a battle sequence. That combined with just the sheer virtuosity of the animation itself, the 3D effects, all that kind of stuff, the camera work, the incredible use of the space, as you say, like Gyu getting fucking yeeted like a mile, and Tanjiro have to hold his own until Gyu comes back. He's like, you motherfucker, my fucking back. That got the biggest laugh out of any moment in the movie, is Gyu showing up and it's like, ow, like, I'm going to be feeling that in my back for a while.
Yes, that was my theater too. Just loved that moment, and it's so underplayed by Sakurai Takahiro there.
Yeah.
But it's so funny. Like in Mugen Train, they definitely we saw like what Akaza can do with his fists, but in the way this movie makes you feel, every fucking punch he throws. Like, every time he makes contact with their swords, every time he, like, throws them through a wall, the sound mix is so good. Honestly, that was the most fun thing about seeing this in IMAX, was the IMAX sound system. The way, like, whenever Akaza threw a punch, it just shook the fucking theater. Mm-hmm. And, like, the way that it just feels so visceral and impactful and kinetic, all of that is wild. And as you say, just the fact that really, like, Gyu's contribution to this fight is to just fight to a stalemate with Akaza until Tanjiro can figure out what to do. And obviously Gyu is like, what he does here is incredible, but like that's all they can kind of do until Tanjiro figures something else out, and that process is like very engaging to watch unfold.
Yes, and you just have a lot of really great moments that kind of build that out, including one of my favorite little moments that really highlights one of these things we've always kind of talked about with Demon Slayer, of its ability to bring a clarity to genre tropes that a lot of Shonen Jump stuff like struggles with, where you have that great exchange kind of in the middle of the fight after Gyu's, gone over to fucking Kansas or whatever he is for a while in the movie. And it's just Tanjiro versus Akaza. And Akaza's giving his whole spiel that is like the most, generic classic anime bad guy. It's the strong must dominate the weak, that's the law of nature, survival of the fittest, even though that's not biologically what survival of the fittest means. It's not strongest, it means most fit into your niche, but whatever. That's, none of these fucking bad guys have ever paid attention in their high school biology class, because they all say survival of the fittest, but none of them know what it means. But they all espouse this thing. It's the most classic ideology of your anime villain, is that might makes right. It's about the strong ruling the world. It's literally, they use the Japanese term they use literally means like strong eat weak meat is like the kanji for the Kyoshoku Jakuniku, the strong eat weak. And that's their ideology, which is fine. Because it's an evil thing. It's an evil lens with which to view the world, and it's fine for bad guys to say it. The thing I always have a problem with in a lot of Shonen Jump stuff is that the good guys never have a good ideological retort to that. They always are just kind of like give some sort of vague friendship based, like, no, it's about trust and love and believing in yourself, and then it always kind of feels like to me that most of these series fail to follow up on any of like this kind of vague sense of it's about friendship and love is good, because it ends up just feeling like, well, the good guy just gets stronger than the bad guy and just beats the bad guy. And I think these series really struggle with how do you actually argue against this philosophy of that, you know, that the nature of the world is that the strong dominate the weak. And that creating systems where the weak are in control of the strong is a perversion of the natural order of things. And I think like Tanjiro gives just such a perfect, clear-eyed takedown of that idea where he's just like, no, dude, everything you just said is completely fucking wrong because everybody's born as an infant. Everybody is weak at some point in their lives, no matter who you are, even you. And the only way anyone can become strong is if they have been protected by someone who is strong. So the actual law of nature, the actual cycle of life is not the strong dominate the weak. It's that the strong protect the weak until the weak becomes strong. And that's the only way that life is able to succeed in the world. And it's like such a great, perfect, actual like argument against Akaza's worldview that also is so supported by all the themes of this series up till now and where it goes from here about this notion of like it is not about how strong you yourself become in your own individual lifetime. It's about how do you contribute to like the line of history and the world in a bigger way, both materially and for Kimetsu no Yaiba, it's got a very spiritual Buddhist component to it. And so all that ties into the notion of reincarnation. But it's like, it's just so refreshing to watch one of these shows and have the character actually understand and be able to cogently express why the ideology of the bad guy is fucking stupid. Because I think we all like instinctively understand, or like hopefully we all instinctively understand that worldview makes no sense and would destroy everything about society and our ability to live as a species. But it's just, it always feels like the main characters never are able to really argue against it. And then the nature of it being an action series means it sort of is a self-defeating thing where the good guy just becomes stronger. But here it's not about, we'll get into like how does Tanjiro win, but it's not really about strength. It's not about like raw power. It's not about might makes right. It's about him being part of this cycle of growth and evolution. And that's a thing that Akaza is no longer a part of because of what he's become. And so that explanation, and I just love that line. I love, as always, Hanai Natsuki is so good as Tanjiro, particularly in those moments, and just the clarity and purity of that performance and of that answer and just the clarity of purpose that Tanjiro has that just makes him so distinctive as a protagonist comes across there so well. And then the movie just has perfect follow through on the ideas expressed in that scene at the end.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is I agree with all of that. And really what sells it is, you know, even in other anime, if they maybe get the character's retort right, most shonen anime are gonna get to the one-on-one where the stronger person does win. And that's not what happens here. Like, Tanjiro is the weakest of the major fighters in this movie. He just is. Like, if you like, Zenitsu has, I think, surpassed him in certain ways. Obviously, I don't think he's quite at the same level as Shinobu or Giyu, but like, Tanjiro's strength doesn't, like, he does have to get to a certain raw level of strength so he can hold his own, but it never comes from him being the most naturally gifted demon slayer with like the greatest untapped power or any of that stuff. Like, at no point in that fight is he actually like doing a better job in the basic like blocking and tackling than Giyu is. Giyu is still his senpai here, right? And he is still the person doing better. But like, and so when and that's, Tanjiro knows that. Tanjiro acknowledges that. Tanjiro's whole thought process in what do I do here is like rack my brain through my past, and basically what he thinks about is going back to those values he espouses to Akaza, and he thinks about what are times I've been protected and how did it happen? And of course he thinks about his dad. He thinks about his dad doing the Hinokami Kagura. He thinks about his dad fighting that bear. He thinks about all of these moments where he was weak and he learned from this person who, well, his dad was sickly, had his own weaknesses, but still managed to do protection. And of course, that is how the fight ends. This is not a movie that ends with him like definitively defeating Akaza. Akaza ultimately has to defeat himself through the things that Tanjiro has kind of prompted in that, again, that sense of the cog turning the big wheel. And so, yeah, it's and this is always the magic of Kimetsu, is it walks the walk. Its themes and its action follows its themes, not the other way around.
Exactly. And it's just like all those things are in lockstep. And it doesn't have the kind of fluff and the distractions that so many of its kind of contemporaries or in like historical peers in this genre oftentimes get bogged down in. It's one of the things that makes Dragon Ball so good and eternal, is that Dragon Ball doesn't want to or bother with those things, because that's not what that series is about. Like Goku and Frieza are not having a big philosophical debate about, Goku's not trying to make a cogent ideological argument about might versus weakness or any of those kinds of things. But there's a lot of series that like try to do that and just can't figure out how to square it with everything else the series is doing. And it's nice that Demon Slayer is really just able to do that so perfectly and so consistently, has done that since the very beginning. And here it's just so well done. And it leads you to this like great moment. It's one of my favorite things from the manga as well, where you just go full the end of the Matrix, and you have the transparent world, right? And obviously this is all the kind of like the Zen Buddhist kind of spiritual foundations of this series, but where Tanjiro must arrive at is being able to see that the world around him is permeable, that it's like the world that we live in is a cage that we build for ourselves, and he has to see the truth that kind of underpins all those things. It is both he goes to the end of the Matrix, and it's also he goes to the Ultra Instinct from Dragon Ball Super, because it's obviously the same thing. The Migate no Gokui, the state of Mu, of nothingness, which is how Akaza refers to it, as a thing that Akaza is never able to attain. But it's that ability of Tanjiro to see the truth of the world, and how that's been built upon all these experiences that he's had, including that lesson from his father when the father killed the bear. And that's the thing that allows him to do what seems to be impossible, a contradiction, which is to kill a motherfucker without having quote unquote killing intent, or saki as the word is in Japanese, or toki as Akaza refers to it, fighting spirit, I think is what the subtitles refer to it as. But being able to sort of like be beyond all of those things and just sort of act with that sort of perfect state of emptiness. It's just a very satisfying kind of martial arts movie resolution to this thing, that again, because Kimetsu Yaiba is a series that is so fundamentally interested in that kind of spiritual worldview, that it fits so perfectly when it comes in here to this kind of level that it does with Tanjiro, where he gets what is almost like kind of like what like is almost kind of like a superpower, but I think they do such a good job of visualizing it in the movie that it doesn't feel like a thing that I think you could very easily make it feel like, where he gets like Superman X-ray vision, which would be a very bad way to visualize it. And instead it feels like that he is stepping into a whole other level of consciousness, that it's not just he can see through things. It's not like a material, literal superpower he gets. It is another heightened state of being that he achieves that allows him to do this thing.
You and I think very similarly about these things. I was also thinking about The Matrix and Dragon Ball Super. And I think you and I both agree that we really like the universe survival arc in Super. And if anything, the Ultra Instinct stuff is underrated, how fucking cool it is. Because what I've always loved about that whole idea is that it is... And I think for Dragon Ball, it was really important because it's sidestepping the question of power-ups. The Ultra Instinct is not a power-up. It's a way of getting around power. It's a way of seeing the world through a different lens than getting stronger. It's about fighting differently. It's also why the end of The Matrix is so powerful, is Neo just stops, and this is also the philosophical, obviously, idea of The Matrix and the Marxist critique, is he stops playing on the terms of the enemy, right? Yeah. He stops seeing the world on the terms that he has been given, and in the new way, it's the there is no spoon thing. It's that those aren't fucking bullets, and I can just stop. That's why it's you can't shoot me, is because those aren't bullets and this isn't my body. We're in a digital world, right? And it's the same kind of thing that happens here. And The Matrix is on my brain because I just finished teaching a 3-week unit on The Matrix in one of my classes. And I was explaining to my students, you guys were all born after The Matrix, but this term, seeing the Matrix, is the way we in the West now express basically this Eastern spiritual idea of the hidden world or something. And yeah, this movie is another one that does that very well. And again, I always love when Tanjiro has these, because he is so connected to family, right? Even though he's lost almost everyone, Nezuko is his reason for fighting, that last connection to his family. And the fact that all of his major revelations through the life of the series come back to his family, his father, all of those things. And of course, for this movie, it feels very relevant with what has happened so far with Shinobu and Zenitsu. And that is what allows Tanjiro to get to this level where, cutting. I love how they depicted it in the movie too. There were a lot of gasps in my theater because he just comes up behind him. For one, there is the amazing, and it's important thematically that he does this, even though it first plays like a joke, which is him shouting, "I'm gonna cut your fucking head off." Okay, he doesn't say fucking, but he's like, "I'm gonna cut your head off." And then and there was a big laugh in my theater, but then there was a big gasp when he just does it. And ufotable doesn't put any spin on the ball in that moment.
Yeah.
He just does it. It's fast. It's over, seemingly. And that's the whole point, is that this isn't an issue of being faster or stronger in this moment. It's coming up on him with a totally different reason. And I love how that plays. And of course, it is important to, I think, everything, like him shouting that line when he does that to Akaza is what prompts Akaza's entire self-revelation that leads to his actual defeat. The fact that Tanjiro says it while he is also doing it without the fighting spirit / killing intent is kind of paradoxically, but also very understandably, the thing that actually wins the fight.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's very important that you don't have him winning the fight because he just sneaks up and fucking shanks this dude, which is what it would like. It's not a sneak attack. It's like, it doesn't matter. And I think it's like important that they display it this way, because if it wasn't, he did the like very honest thing, the very Tanjiro thing of like declaring, "I'm going to cut your head off. Like this is going to, like, it's over. I'm going to do it." If he didn't do that, it would just kind of play like, oh, his ability is to be able to sneak up on people undetected, and just assassinate them. But it's like, no, like that's not what it is. It's that once, that the whole worldview that Akaza has, which is defined by being able to sense this fighting spirit, this energy in other people, this very like material, concrete desire, suffering, that kind of stuff in other people. He is so wrapped up in that way of understanding the world that when Tanjiro has entered this totally other place, it doesn't matter if he's coming up from behind him or if he shouts and is coming straight up and Akaza can visually see Tanjiro. There's nothing Akaza can do because Tanjiro is in a different plane. He's reached a different level that Akaza can't reach. And you get that great little like internal monologue afterwards where you learn that Akaza is aware that this thing has existed, that this is like what he has been doing, these massacres and fighting these Hashira for like 2 centuries or something at this point to try to attain this state. And he's never been able to get there. And Tanjiro, who's like 17 years old or however old he is at this point, is able to do it. And like it's just the way that all that is thematically tied in together, where again, it is like Akaza's, by having removed himself from humanity, stepped out of the spiritual existence, this world of the cycle of reincarnation, both like literally and symbolically through family. He's lost his memories, all that kind of stuff. He can never attain this thing that he's constantly chasing, and Tanjiro is able to attain it almost like easily because of how deeply he's tied into those things that even other people like the Hashira are not able to get to, because they are also held back by certain things. Because we've talked about before that like one of the fun things and interesting things about Demon Slayer is how the flashbacks that the Hashira have of how they became demon slayers and the flashbacks the demons have about how they became demons are like 2 sides of the same coin. And all those flashbacks, it's like if it goes slightly differently, it would be on the other side, right? If the Akaza thing was instead of his family getting poisoned, a demon broke into that house and ate them, and then fucking Gyomei showed up, Akaza would have been a demon slayer. Like all these people are defined by that tragedy. But I think Tanjiro is the one who you just, even though he has that tragedy in his background, you can never see him ever becoming a demon. Like it's so outside of who he is and his essence as a person that he's so far removed from that is, I think, part of the thing that separates him from the other demon slayers that allows him to attain this state that he's able to attain in this movie.
It almost sounds like you're foreshadowing something that might happen in the 3rd movie in this trilogy.
Who knows?
But who knows? Anyway, sorry. You go read the manga if you want. Anyway, I agree with all of that. It's so true. And I just love the way it's depicted. We also, let's talk here now as we get into the Akaza stuff. Ishida motherfucking Akira in this movie Ishida Akira is one of our favorite voice actors on this podcast, I think it is fair to say. He is Athron in Gundam Seed. He is Gaara in Naruto. He is Kaworu in Eva. He is the protagonist Ryoji and Pharos in Persona 3. If there is a Japanimation Station Hall of Fame, he is in it. And this is some of his best work ever. Obviously he was really great as Akaza in Mugen Train, but in Mugen Train, Akaza is a pretty one-dimensional villain. He is more symbolic than anything. He is the mountain that you cannot climb. And so he comes into this movie playing villain voice, and he exits this movie making you fucking cry. And that transformation, the number of sides of Akaza he shows in basically the last 40 minutes of this movie, I think it is as a fan of Japanese voice acting, it is humbling to behold the craft that this guy is pouring into his art in this film. It is tremendous. It is give this guy an award for this performance. It's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. Because all sides of it are so good because part of it is also the villain Akaza voice is very effective. But even back in Mugen Train, there is this little thing in him. Yes. That I think you can see this little spark. And part of it is the way in which he's engaging with Rengoku, or Kyojiro, as he refers to him. And it's kind of fucked up, but it's very different than the Doma thing, right? Where Doma is also kind of weirdly overly familiar and kind of gross in the way that he kind of intrudes upon your space verbally. And Akaza kind of does that, and he's kind of almost a little bit of a bro, almost in the way he's referring to Kyojiro and all that stuff, just referring to him by his given name. But I think you can feel how it is motivated by this real desire for self-improvement, that there is this very human thing buried deep down inside of Akaza, this kind of martial artist ideology that he wants to grow, he wants to evolve, but he's fucking stuck and he doesn't know how to do it. And he's trying to pull Rengoku in and turn him into a demon, because I think Akaza is telling him you can be immortal. Imagine you can be at the greatest strength for all of time. But there's a contradiction in that of his desire to become more powerful by fighting more powerful people, and also this sort of stagnation that he's promoting of if you become a demon, yes, you will never deteriorate, but in a certain sense you will never truly improve either. You can technically become more powerful by eating other people, but there is this sense of becoming a demon cuts you off from a certain style of improving that being a human does. And so I think you can feel that Akaza has this struggle inside of him in that movie. And you get it here very clearly as well. And it starts becoming very intense about the midpoint of the movie when you have that little argument with Tanjiro. He has that brief moment where Nakamura Yuichi comes in and says a little line to him, and he fucking tries to, back fist this ghost on his shoulder or whatever that Tanjiro is very confused by. And I like that is a literal thing that Akaza is doing physically in the world. And it's not just purely symbolic representation. It's no, this dude is literally haunted by his past. And it's you just see those little cracks in who he is, and that there is this sort of suffering and this contradiction deep in the heart of who Akaza is as a person. And as the fight goes on, that becomes more and more exposed until he gets his head cut off. He doesn't die. He's holding on to this life. And then it all starts just coming fucking pouring out of him, and he can't stop it, of these realizations of what he is and how fucked his life is and how far off the path he has gone by this point.
Totally. And I agree with what you said about Mugen Train too, because I think we even said probably at the time, Ishida Akira is kind of interesting against typecasting for a villain like this.
Yes.
At least in how Akaza initially appears to us. And there is that I agree, Doma is a good comparison, because Akaza does kind of have this sense of friendliness and fun with his competitors, but there's more of a yearning to it. I think he really does want Kyojiro to be his friend. Yes. He really does want a sparring partner in this hellish eternity he is stuck in. He really is surprised when he gets to fight strong people. But so there is this weird contorted humanity in there that we don't get much insight into in that film, and now we get it, as you say, pouring out here as he starts falling apart. And when we get into the full long flashback, one, this is just one of Gotouge best piece of writing in the manga is Akaza's backstory. I think it's the best of all the demon backstories. I think it highlights that, like, as you were saying, the demon and the Hashira backstories are always very similar. And the Hashira backstories tend to be about the evils of the demons, and the demon backstories tend to be about the evils of humanity, right? And Akaza's story does such a good job of highlighting that idea of someone who is, like, Akaza, as we see him in the past, has a fundamental goodness to him. Like, he really wants to help his dad. He really wants to be with other people. Like, there's something really, like, compellingly human about this person. And the evils of humanity that he sees that are obviously inexcusable, and then obviously Muzan preys on those, but what happens is he winds up abandoning the goodness of his own humanity out of spite for the evils of humanity. And it is this experience in this film that allows him to kind of reconnect with that and have this final moment. And it's stunning. I love that even though, you know, this is the end of the movie, like, they take their sweet time with that flashback, and they should, because it's so good, and because you want to hear Ishida do his thing, and you need to hear Nakamura Yuichi make a full character out of Keizo, and you have the other actor here that we should mention is Lin, playing Koyuki, who is the love interest in that section, the daughter of Keizo, and people on this podcast would know her as Miorine Rembrandt from G-Witch. So just everybody in this movie is in a Gundam somewhere, like, I think literally, and I think that's funny. But anyway, like, that whole series of connections, like, I thought about this a lot, that, like, obviously this is the first original Demon Slayer movie since Mugen Train. They called it Akaza Returns in Japan for a reason, obviously, like, knowing
that this is a very popular character.
Yes, and Mugen Train being the highest grossing film in that country's history, all of that stuff. But, like, I do love the ways this movie mirrors Mugen Train, where you get to the end of Mugen Train and you are just beside yourself with how much you love Rengoku and how sad you are to see him go. And I don't know if you're beside yourself, but you do come to this movie, and the tragedy at the end of this movie is for Akaza. There's something so cool, and obviously this is all taken from the manga, but the way they structured in the films, that the first Demon Slayer film, you end mourning Rengoku, and the second Demon Slayer film, you end mourning his killer. Like, what a fucking magic trick. This is such a special series.
Yes, absolutely. Like, it's such a incredible, like, journey to get to that point where you are, you know, like, because I teared up in the movie theater at a certain point with that flashback. Especially because like, I kind of vaguely remembered what his backstory was, but I didn't remember all the details. And I think that they do, you know, expand on it here and kind of flesh it out even more in the anime version. But it is, like, so touching. And, you know, Ishida Akira's performance is so good, like, his narrating over this, both, like, him narrating it and then him playing the young, like, human version of Akaza as well. But then also it is, like, you know, Nakamura Yuichi, he's taken the opportunity of being in Demon Slayer, even if it's just for one movie. He's like, fuck it, I'm going all in, because it's like, it's such a great performance. I mean, obviously it always is. If you said earlier with Ishida Akira that if there's a Japanimation Station Hall of Fame, he's in it. If there's a Japanimation Station Hall of Fame for voice actors, Nakamura Yuichi's probably number one on the fucking sheet, because I like that you listed out, I think, just like the main things we've covered before that he's in. This is even everything, but he's Tomiya and Clannad, Ordaki and Hyoka, Graham Aker / Mr. Bushido in 00 Gundam. He's also the one guy in Thunderbolt. He's in the Gundam in Gundam Thunderbolt as well. He's Satoru in Jujutsu Kaisen, Gojo. He's Han Jungi in Yakuza, and he's Louis, the bad guy in Metaphor Refantasio. And it's
that is a non-exhaustive list. If there is the Japanimation Station Voice Actor Hall of Fame, I think Nakamura Yuichi's face is just like the door that you walk through to get into it, because he is just inescapable in the things we like to talk about, and him showing up in Kimetsu is like the final piece in that puzzle somehow.
Yeah, and it's, like, particularly funny that his first appearance is as this, like, mysterious ghost with, like, one line in that scene. And in his voice, you know, if you like the stuff, his voice is so distinctive that immediately you're like, oh yeah, motherfucker, yep, this is going to be good. Once we get some more Nakamura Yuichi, this shit's going to be great. But the way he plays that character is so compelling. Like, there's that one moment after he brings little kid Akaza back to his dojo, and he just, like, casually is like, hey, you know, I want you to take care of my daughter because, you know, my wife walked into the lake and drowned herself the other day. And he just says it with, like, that same smile that the character has and this kind of jovial disposition. And it's just like, and, like, I could feel the energy of the movie theater as everybody processed that line, especially
Yes, me too.
They're reading the subtitles, and you're like, what huh? Because you're like trying to put together like, oh shit. You're kind of like realize what this guy is, and how, even these, that this is the way in which he's like Tanjiro, right? Of why Akaza sees Tanjiro and remembers this dude is the way in which he doesn't let these awful tragedies destroy him, right? Obviously, I think you assume it probably affects this dude in places that he's not showing. He's not, going to show this to this little kid he's trying to help out, right? He's putting on that face in part to help Akaza lift himself up. And I think you can kind of read into the character that one of the reasons he adopts Akaza in this way is probably like in part to kind of heal this trauma he suffered. But you just get the sense that Keizo is not letting this trauma destroy his faith in humanity. He's not letting it sort of cause him to go down the wrong path. He's trying to use it to better himself as a person and to grow and become stronger in that kind of emotional, spiritual way. And that's the thing that makes him so powerful, right? He seems like completely unbeatable. And that's exactly what Tanjiro's like. And it's the thing that Akaza is not able to achieve. And it's understandable. I don't think you could blame Akaza for going off the deep end after all the shit that has happened in his life. But you see this example of that there are people who don't, that there is still a choice, that, right? Like, even when these awful things happen, you can be compassionate for people who go down the wrong path because of that. But there should be an understanding that that's not an inevitability, that there was still a choice of like, how do you deal with these terrible things that have happened? And you can't just use them as an excuse to do terrible things in the world as well. And the way in which Nakamura Yuichi embodies all that stuff in the character that's introduced in kind of like we leave off in this movie. It's just like a real tour de force performance that is really fucking phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, you had to have someone of that like talent level to pull this off, I think, because you have to get the sense that Keizo, like, he could be one of the Hashira. He could be he could be one of the greatest people in this world, and his life was cut short by this horrendous act of cowardice. Like, they really have to sell you on the idea that, like, while yes, Akaza could have made another choice, you don't blame him for a second for the choices he makes, because like you just feel it, that like, of course this would break someone who had become that fragile over time. And I love the way they bring Muzan into that scene. Also, that is the first time you see Muzan in this movie. That like Muzan is this very phantasmal presence that they are trying to get to, but he's not physically on screen until the flashback where he comes to get Akaza, and what he says is, I heard about a demon attack here and I didn't send anyone. And the whole idea that what Akaza, the human version, Hakuji is his name, has done to the people who killed, and many other people who didn't, who killed his newfound family, Keizo and Koyuki, was demonic. That like he was twisted by humanity into something demonic, and here's Muzan to prey on it, right? Because that's who he is. That is also just a great way this movie is structured, that is where Muzan comes in, and it's such a potent reminder of the ultimate evil they are fighting, right?
Yeah. It's fucking Satan is here to lead people astray, yeah.
Right. It's so good. But that whole flashback scene also, there's something about it that I think in its form as filmmaking is so compelling. It basically proceeds linearly, but there's still this feeling that it's kind of kaleidoscopic, that it is like memories that are pouring out. The way that like we jump from one time period to the next feels so like sensual in the way that it is these things being remembered. It is synapses firing in his brain. And I think the standout scene here is when you have Akaza and Koyuki walking along. It's when she basically proposes to him, and they're walking along the river, and you have these lights going off because there are fireworks, but you're not seeing them. You're seeing the light that is shining on the characters, and then eventually you get that full shot of them framed by the fireworks. That scene feels like someone from KyoAni came over and guest directed that sequence, because it is so pulled right out of like A Silent Voice and some of their other stuff, because KyoAni loves their fireworks scenes, but it is such a like beautiful sensual sequence in that way of it feels like the memory is what it felt like to be there, not just what happened. And like, I think this whole flashback sequence is so attuned to that Akaza is not just literally remembering the things that happened to him, he's remembering how it felt to live those things. And that's the magic of filmmaking right there, you know?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where we talked like near the beginning of this discussion of the ways in which there's these kind of two styles in the movie. There's what is happening in the present tense in the Infinity Castle, and then there's this more kind of traditional animation, but also kind of more traditional Japanese cinematic language that these flashbacks use, especially this one because you're in Edo, Japan, and you have these like traditional, like the dojo and all that, and it is one of those things that it's making use of that like still shots with like the complex kind of geometric frames within frames of these doors built out of like big rectangles and stuff like that. The little room that Koyuki is in, you just get this sort of this sense of where we shift into this other aesthetic style that I just say also is working on this dream logic of the way that it's cutting and editing together, and Ishida Akira's narration as he's sort of slowly remembering all these things that are coming out of him in this moment. It is like a real masterful part of the movie. I would be very interested to know which one of the unit directors was in charge of that sequence, because it feels like it has like a very distinctive sort of directorial presence within the film. Like that whole flashback has such a unique sensibility unto itself that it feels like there must have been a particular person or team of people that were really in charge of that sequence to make it feel the way it does, because it does feel like you're just out of time and space when you're in that sequence.
Yeah. So we don't really talk about dubs on here ever, and from what I've heard of the Demon Slayer dub, I've never really liked it, but did you see who they cast as Keizo in English?
Yes, because I did see a picture, or it was it was a thumbnail of a YouTube video with Hanai Natsuki standing next to Channing Tatum. And I was like, what the fuck is, what, why, And then I clicked the video, it's like, oh, he plays the Nakamura Yuji character. That's wild. That's fucking crazy. Then I later found out that it's like his daughter is way into anime or something, and that's why he wanted to take the role, which is cool. And I know he's done voice acting and other stuff, but it was very surreal to see a picture of Channing Tatum and my favorite nerdy Japanese dude, Hanai Natsuki, with his like fucking glasses, all that shit, cosplaying as Tanjiro. It's like a very weird, very, very weird picture to see.
Yeah, props to Channing Tatum because obviously he would have had to take a pay cut from whatever he normally does, because this is not a like full SAG live action production, right? This is something else, presumably SAG-AFTRA. But anyway, so kudos to him, and I'd be curious when I get like the Blu-ray for this movie to switch over to that to hear what Channing Tatum did, because I'm sure it's fun, and I like that is a part where I think like stunt casting is appropriate, where you can do something big with it, so that makes sense. Yeah,
and I don't even think it's stunt casting, because I don't, unless it's happening somewhere I'm not seeing, but I don't feel like they marketed the movie off of it's like Demon Slayer featuring Channing Tatum.
Can you imagine that on the poster? It's Channing Tatum in Demon Slayer the movie Infinity Castle.
Part 1, Akaza returns.
Yeah. Oh gosh. No. But yeah, this is, Sean, we're getting closer to all of the joke Hollywood castings we've done for anime dubs in the past on various podcasts. Where we're getting there. But no. I just thought that was funny and worth mentioning. So yeah. Amazing flashback. All of the animation in this section. Another thing that I wanted to mention about the Akaza stuff is, obviously, the musical score for this by Shinobu and Kajiura Yuki is fantastic. It's always fantastic. It's almost like, how do we find new ways to describe how fantastic it is? But obviously this movie has, 4 seasons of TV worth of themes to build on, but particularly it builds on the Akaza theme from Mugen Train, which is a great piece of music. In Mugen Train, it is this fucking rip-roaring electric guitar piece, and they put it into so many different forms in this film. It comes back initially as rip-roaring electric guitar, obviously, but it ends the movie, I believe, played on an organ mournfully.
Yes.
And it is such a great symbol of what the magic trick this movie plays, that the score also takes this character and transforms him. Because there's many permutations of the Akaza motif from the point where we go to guitar to organ, and they do so much good work with it across the film. But that is one of the most impressive pieces of scoring in this whole franchise, and again, that is saying something. The way they take that motif and just play with it over the course of this movie, that really blew me away.
Yeah, I like that you shouted that out because it's also something I noticed because there is a moment in the kind of the middle part of the fight. I think it's around the time like Akaza's starting to deal with these kind of hallucinations or ghosts that he's seeing, where you get a little bit of an organ in the action version of his theme that like I heard like, is that a fucking organ? And it's like it's just kind of mixed in there. It's not super prominent. But then yes, near the end of all that stuff, when you get to the flashback and all that, you do get a version that's like a sad, mournful version of it that has just a full church organ. I'm like, that's cool. They kind of seed that instrumentation shift in the action a little bit. Yeah, it's very good. It's the soundtrack across the whole movie is phenomenal, but it is that Akaza stuff and how they work on that theme here because it's a very memorable theme from Mugen Train. Like even if you only see that movie once, I feel like you can like hum. There's like that little kind of distorted vocal part of the Akaza theme that's kind of the main melody. That's just like it really sticks in your mind. And it's really cool to see them get to play with and develop that theme in new ways in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, again, just like every component part of this movie is operating at such a high bar.
Yeah.
And, you do get to the end of this, you get to the resolution of Akaza's story. You have Tanjiro and Giyu slump over in exhaustion. This was another big laugh moment, was Giyu desperately trying to stay awake for Tanjiro and then slumping over, but he's still on his sword, like holding himself up as he's passed out. And then we have, our final little recap of where is everyone in the castle, and we have Muzan give his big villain speech, and we cut to black. But, like, I honestly, it reminded me a lot of, like, the ending of, like, Fellowship of the Ring, where, okay, this is the beginning of a trilogy. In no way have we finished the story of this thing. Like, we're not even that much closer to the endpoint goal of defeating Muzan Kibutsuji. And yet, this movie, it feels like, yes, I want to get up and walk out of the theater because this was such a good story I just watched that I want to process it, and it felt like a full movie unto itself. And in the same way, I think every time I go back to Fellowship, I'm like, by God, this movie is kind of a fucking miracle that it feels this complete when it is in fact not complete. I got a very similar feeling out of this.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. That there's a sense of finality to it. There's just such a profound sense of payoff to all of it. And some of it is also just like, I think it works so well having the first movie be focused on Akaza because you already have an attachment to the character. But there's just like a lot of these little moments of payoff at the end from things set up in Mugen Train. That this is all obviously like paying dividends from really smart stuff Gotouge did in the manga. But, there's this beautiful dark irony in the narrative of Akaza at the end of the movie trying to rip himself apart because he doesn't want to regenerate anymore, when the whole thing this character was introduced with is him being like, Kyojiro, become a demon because then you will never die, you'll never wither away, right? And he's like a guy who his arm starts regenerating as you're cutting it off. Like, this is how fucking invincible this dude is. And having the movie end with him desperately trying to kill himself and literally rip himself to pieces because he's like, it's fucking enough. Like, he's trying to will himself not to regenerate anymore. And there's just such a powerful sense of payoff and catharsis to seeing this character arrive to this point that he has realized how wrong he has always been. That I think is one of the things that gives this movie that sense when you're leaving it, that like there's a completeness to it, even when, as you said, like most of the shit's not done yet. Like nobody's even gotten anywhere close to even seeing Muzan yet. So like the literal A plot of we got to kill Muzan has not really moved in any real way because we've only kind of killed some people along the way to get to that part. But I think because of how much attachment you have to Akaza, how well designed as a antagonist he's been, and how fully complete that resolution feels at the end of the movie, as you have that beautiful moment of him slowly fading away as he's embracing the ghosts of Koyuki and Keizo, who have to go to heaven and he's going to go to hell. But he's like holding on to them and crumbles as Tanjiro watches him. It's a great panel from the manga that they just reproduce here beautifully. It gives you this sense of completion of the narrative, even when there's so much left to do. And it definitely has that kind of fellowship feeling of we have come to a place of sort of understanding, even in kind of thematic resolution, even when the larger narrative still looms very heavily on the horizon.
Totally. Obviously, it is working for more people than just us. You want to talk about the insane box office records of this movie?
Yes.
So, okay, let's start with what it's done in Japan, because I would describe what this movie has done is very similar to Avatar 2, The Way of Water, where James Cameron's Avatar is the highest grossing movie of all time. When Avatar 2 finally came out, I think everyone expected it would do well. I don't think anyone expected it would quite repeat the success of Avatar 1. And then Avatar: The Way of Water just completely repeated the success of Avatar 1, and it basically broke the same records. It broke them in a similar time frame. It ended its run with a little bit less money than Avatar 1, but still as like near the very top of the charts. And I think Infinity Castle has done the same thing with Mugen Train. It broke all of the same records Mugen Train did, so opening weekend, opening day, second week, all of those sorts of things in Japan. Its current revenue just within Japan domestically is 31.43 billion yen. Mugen Train, which has the overall record, is 40.75 billion yen. And the number 2 movie is still Spirited Away at 31.68. Infinity Castle is going to surpass that. That's not that much, and it's still playing in Japanese theaters, so it's going to become number 2. It probably won't hit that ultimate Mugen Train record, which is just way out there. But like the fact that it's going to be a relatively close number 2, I think has like belied all expectations, especially because like this is the beginning of a trilogy. I didn't see it. I don't know. Did you, Sean, think it would be repeating the success this wildly?
Yeah, I mean, I thought obviously that it would do well, but yeah, I do think there's like, it felt like, that Kimetsu Yaiba has been around for a while at this point. There's also the question of like, how much does that fervor for the franchise is it able to maintain across all these years? Post Mugen Train. Mugen Train also had this kind of like unique positioning around like the pandemic as well that like made it kind of hard to understand how did that affect the way that it performed to like, could it be replicated again? But yeah, I mean, I expected it would do well, but I did not expect it to like, to basically do another Mugen Train.
Yes. So that's where things are in Japan. Now, here in America for this weekend, as of we are recording this Sunday morning, September 15th, or that's when I put these numbers together, estimates are for a $70 million 3-day opening in the U.S. after a $33 million Friday and a $21 million Saturday. It is the 6th biggest opening ever for the month of September in the United States. It is the best ever for an anime movie. It is the best ever for a Crunchyroll release, and it is the best for Sony in the last 2 years, I believe since the last Spider-Man. 55% of tickets were for subtitled showings, so it leaned towards in native Japanese, not in the English dub. For those wondering what are the other top anime openings, the record that this beat is the 26-year-old record of Pokemon the first movie, which for all this time has still been the biggest anime opening. It had $31 million for the weekend. Infinity Castle beat that in one day, let alone the full weekend. The number 2 was Mugen Train, which had $21 million. That was also one of the first movies to come out after the pandemic here. Dragon Ball Super Superhero was like tied for number 2, also at $21 million. Jujutsu Kaisen Zero had an $18 million opening weekend, and Boy and the Heron had a $13 million opening weekend. So to say for an anime movie this like broke those records, it shattered, it doubled, it tripled those records. It is also by far the biggest opening ever for a foreign film in the US, and for a subtitled film, and for an R-rated animated movie, and so on. Those are just ones that came to mind off the top of my head. I have not seen anyone do an exhaustive catalog of the number of records this just broke. But like, if Hollywood is open to learning lessons, which it often is not, so who knows. But if it is, this feels like it should be some kind of watershed moment. Like, there are big Hollywood releases that cost $300 million this year that didn't open as well as Demon Slayer just opened. There are movies from Disney and Warner Brothers that are going to close their runs with less money than this movie made. Like, this is a big, big moment. I think the fact that you have a foreign language film with subtitles playing in theaters, an R-rated animated movie, a 2.5-hour movie that ends with a 40-minute flashback sequence, like all of that leading to these kinds of numbers, like, and I don't just mean that like the lesson should be release more anime. To me, the takeaway that Hollywood should have is blockbusters are not the narrow thing you think they are. If this thing can be a huge blockbuster, like just and this has always been true, but like the picture Hollywood has in its head for what can do well as a wide theatrical release is just so much wider than anyone sitting in a C-suite understands, other than maybe the C-suite at Sony that like now very much understands this.
Yeah, I mean, Sony has obviously in the past several years, along with other companies, but Sony has been like really at the front of this, investing super heavily into anime, right? And so they bought Funimation, they bought Crunchyroll. You can just feel how much like they are, really using that as a linchpin for a lot of their entertainment stuff. Especially as their Morbius and Craven the Hunter movies and Madam Web were not so successful at the box office. It is like, well, we're a Japanese company. They've owned Aniplex forever. And
Yes.
They've always been big in anime in certain circles, but I think it makes sense that like they're kind of making that on an international scale is just coming like a kind of front and center part of their overall business. And obviously it has worked incredibly well for them. And you can see how, places like Netflix and Disney have been trying to get anime into their services and all that kind of stuff. And it does, I think, just sort of show you that just like the media trends have changed so much since we were kids. This was, Pokemon is a very unique thing because honestly, people never thought of it really as anime. Or like I think like kids at the time, I never distinguished Pokemon, even as someone who watched anime like Dragon Ball. Pokemon to me fit in the same bucket as like Cartoon Network shows like Ed, Ed and Eddy more so than it did Dragon Ball to me.
It has never had any presence in the U.S. in its Japanese form.
Yes.
Obviously, Pokemon, the first movie never played with subtitles, any of that stuff. So it is a very different... that was a big WB release, very different case.
Yeah, so outside of like that kind of like thing where Pokemon just existed in a very different sphere, this movie and what it's doing was inconceivable when we were kids. Or any foreign movie kind of doing this was just like sort of what? Who sees a subtitled thing at a movie theater? Like you couldn't even see subtitled anime most of the time, unless you like went and found some fucking weird VHSs.
Dragon Ball didn't have a subtitled theatrical release until Superhero.
Yeah.
That's easy to forget. That was the first time Dragon Ball ever played in American theaters subtitled. I think this has fallout for, and I've been saying this forever, like, I do think we're probably headed for a world where, for a long time in our lives, our parents' lives, the status quo had been, in American theaters, American movies played. And in foreign theaters, American movies also played, right? Like, we exported movies, but we didn't so much import them except at, like, art house venues and stuff like that, right? And for very particular purposes. And I just think there's no inherent reason that has to be the case. Lots of other countries, Japan and China and France and all sorts of places, make big blockbuster movies for the masses, too. And there's no inherent reason Americans wouldn't enjoy those. And like right now, the emphasis is on anime, but like, the biggest box office story of this year is that the highest grossing movie of this year was and will be Ne Zha 2 from China. And Ne Zha 2 has broken every rule that we thought we had for like non-American movies. The one place where Ne Zha 2 wasn't huge was America. And I think it's because it came out here sort of treated like a foreign film. I think if Ne Zha 2 if like DreamWorks had licensed Ne Zha 2, given it a celebrity dub cast, and just released it as a movie. Not a foreign movie, not a Chinese cartoon, but just as another movie. There's absolutely no reason Ne Zha 2 couldn't have been huge here too. It is basically a DreamWorks movie in style, just made in China. And with some cooler, big, crazy visuals that happen in it. And I think, like, yes, the audience exists for anime now, but there's no reason you can't cultivate other audiences. And as Hollywood collapses in various ways and keeps... And like right now, the status quo is that even the hits this year are not making money. Like because of overseas box office going down, like Superman did phenomenally here. It didn't do that well overseas. That movie probably will not have turned a profit theatrically. Fantastic Four definitely didn't turn a profit theatrically. Like, I think a lot of these studios would be wise to see, like, well, what are, like, movies from other countries we could distribute here? Because that's cheap. That's a cheap thing to do. It's free money if you can get behind it. And, like, there is... I think that the truism that Americans don't watch subtitled movies is definitively dead as of this weekend. Like, you can put that to rest. We can start moving in a different direction. And there's a different future available for American moviegoers than I think was the status quo conventional wisdom, for most of our lives. Yeah,
because it's like, we have like a couple generations at this point that have grown up, whether it's anime, but also other stuff, and other foreign media. And, like, obviously Squid Game was one of the biggest shows on Netflix. You have, Godzilla -1 was fucking huge, and won all these awards and all this stuff. That there's a willingness amongst a now very large portion of the American population, because we're old fuckers now, we're in our 30s. All so many of the kids I teach, and I've been teaching for 6 years now. I've been a high school teacher for a while at this point, and every single year it's felt like more and more of these kids are into things like K-pop, are into anime, into foreign media in whatever forms it might take for their particular interests, but are interested in consuming that media in that language, are curious about that language, are curious about that culture, and have just like a bigger exposure to it because of the way that like internet and streaming services and the way you access music, all that stuff is so much more open now. And there are ways that on things like TikTok, they can become viral and kids can become exposed to it. And it's like, it's very necessary for these more traditional media, kind of enterprises like Hollywood to see that exists and to take advantage of that, instead of just sort of saying, well, what's the next superhero movie we're going to make? It's like, which superhero property have we not yet adapted? Well, I know we did Kraven the Hunter. That's like, what other like C-list fucking Spider-Man villain can we get next time? That's like, there's a bigger world of media that you can engage with. And as I say, Jonathan, you don't have to make it. You can fucking license it. Yes. It's like, and you can get a lot of money from that and shoulder very little of the risk. And it's, Sony feels like it gets that, partially because Sony is a foreign company. So it's like, I think it already has a foot in that world. But I hope for like the sake of movie theaters and stuff like that our industry sees these things and is learning these lessons and is bringing over other kind of media as well, not just anime, but all kinds of other movies and stuff like that, for people to be able to enjoy in the movie theater. Because this was like one of the most fun movie theater experiences I've had in a long time. Like there was just like such a passion and energy for it. Like it might be the most fun I had in movie theater since Mugen Train. And I've seen other very fun movies I've seen in theaters, like stuff like Kimi no Ito was not that long ago, but I was like one of like 10 people in that movie theater. But there's just such an energy to this showing. There's such a huge amount of enthusiasm that it kind of reminded me of why it can be fun to see things in movie theaters in a way that watching Superman and Fantastic Four, while I liked those movies, the movie-going experience was not all that exciting for those films. Like, there wasn't that kind of, like, buzz of energy in there, because it's like, oh, we like Superman, but there wasn't, like, an incredible passion for it like there was for Kimetsu. And obviously that's because the property itself is really popular, but I think that that's also true of lots of other stuff. Like, I have not seen this yet, but I know that K-pop Demon Hunter is hugely popular. A bunch of my kids are talking about it. And I know that if I had gone and seen that in the theater, that I would have had that kind of movie-going experience. I don't know if I'd like the movie or not, probably would. But, like, regardless, I know that there had been a lot of people in that movie theater super fucking excited about seeing that movie, because it's not just another standard mainstream whatever IP adaptation blockbuster Hollywood film that they have been rinsing and repeating since 2008.
I did go to see K-pop Demon Hunters in its theater because it is theatrical release, because my brother's fiance really loved it on Netflix and she loves the soundtrack. So they took me to see that, and I hadn't seen it yet because I don't have Netflix. And I really liked the movie. It was fun. But as you're saying, Sean, kind of the experience was the fun of it also. Like, there were all these, particularly like little kids, like elementary schoolers, who were just like literally dancing in the aisle to the music. And like, that's awesome. That's cool that those kids get to have that memory. And it's for an original property, not, the Lilo and Stitch remake or fucking, whatever they're on now. Right? Like, I felt good for those kids. Like, oh, thank God, you guys have something to love that's yours, that isn't from like my generation or my fucking grandpa's generation in the case of, Snow White, that is being shoved down your throat, So like, this is cool. And yeah, I just think all of this points towards a very different future for this industry if Hollywood will kind of take the message, because, Hollywood is in a downturn in a lot of ways. America's position in the world is in a downturn in a lot of ways. Oh, yeah. But I think certain things need to change, and obviously, this is just a big event in box office history. And for October, I believe the only big studio release is Tron Ares, and I think that movie is going to bomb like both Tron and Tron Legacy did, because that's not a series that's ever been successful.
Yes.
And so maybe don't make a sequel to it starring Jared Leto, someone everybody hates. But one of the other big releases in October is the Chainsaw Man movie, and I'm guessing that's going to be big. I don't think it's going to be Kimetsu big, but like it will almost certainly be the #1 movie of the weekend it comes out, and I think it's not inconceivable that we will have 2 consecutive months where the highest grossing movies in the US are anime films and sequel films to TV series. And like, I think when you have that and it becomes a trend, that's when people start to sit up and take notice, you know?
Yes, but I think you're missing the true movie theater experience we're all waiting for in October, which is on October 20th, which is when Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, The Lonely Dragon, or whatever the subtitles translated into English, will be in movie theaters, which is I have had on my calendar for a very long time at this point, because I know that obviously that is not going to have the kind of audience that Kimetsu no Yaiba did, but I'm going to fucking be there. And I should buy a fucking cosplay. I should try to dress up as Toru just to fucking represent. I can be the one person in the movie theater for that movie, because it's going to be fucking great.
Okay, well, if you do that, send me a picture, because I want to see you in the Miss Kobayashi costume. But no, yeah, well, that's what we should say that, Sean. That's coming this month. And then how long is City the Animation going to be going for? Is that a one-core? Do we know?
I think it's 13 episodes, I believe, and it's episode 11 aired today.
Okay, so we might, near the end of September, have to do a double feature of KyoAni follow-up episodes talking about City the Animation and the Miss Kobayashi movie. So those will be, at some point this year, we'll do those. In the meantime, Sean and I are hard at work on the next season of Japanimation Station. It's been slow going, mainly because of life stuff that's happened, but we are working on it. The episodes that we've done so far are good. We're excited for you to hear them. I do think Tomino-thon is probably at this point facing a delay into 2026, just so people know, because we want to make sure we have enough of it done before we start airing them, so there won't be big delays. But we are working on it, and we're having fun, and we've got some weird-ass shows that you guys are going to hear about.
Oh, yes. We have some weird-ass shows that people will be able to hear about.